And we are finally back. Everybody, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Friday. It's a little later than normal, but we needed to move things around so I could be on the show today because I have missed being on the show. I've missed all of you, missed Ryan even a little bit. I think Ryan maybe missed me a little bit, but we appreciate your patience and prayers and everything that's been going on this week. But we are back. Ryan, it's been a crazy week, obviously, but we're back ready to talk some Notre Dame football, man. And you and I have talked a lot about just this team and the bye week, and we had a lot of things planned for the week, and they kind of got thrown out. But what we want to discuss today is just Notre Dame coming out of the bye week. And the reality is this is a football team that has a chance to really make a run here over the next 8 games. Every team on the schedule is beatable. There's a lot of teams on the schedule that can beat Notre Dame. If Marshall can beat Notre Dame, there's a lot of teams over the next 8 weeks that can beat Notre Dame. So we're going to discuss sort of where Notre Dame is, the areas that we think they need to improve upon to become a team that can go out there and beat the rest of the teams on the schedule. Because like I said, they're all beatable. But whether or not Notre Dame can beat them remains to be seen. And I know there's a lot of excitement about what they did in the last game offensively. But, Ryan, I got to see a lot more than blasting the worst defense possibly in Power 5 before I'm ready to say the offense has turned a corner. But at least it was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it was a massive step. I mean, we've been kind of talking about it, right, Brian? It's like after the first 2 games, you have to start seeing exponential growth because it was just Notre Dame was not in a good spot. And then even the Cal game kind of left you wanting more, like it was a nice victory, but it was something where like the offense was inconsistent and still kind of, it just was not the peak or the step that you wanted them to take in that football game. Defense has been okay in spurts, but in large part, I mean, it's just been a very inconsistent approach the first 3 games. And you saw glimpses, I think, of in the North Carolina game, how good this team can be. It's again, they didn't pull it out for a whole portion of the game. They still need to kind of find the level of consistency, but you saw good defensive points of the game. You saw high level football on the offensive side of the football. You saw the steps that you need to take. For me, it's just exponential growth each and every week from now on.
We saw a glimpse of what this offense is supposed to be. Right. We saw a glimpse of it. And so, this is kind of what it's funny, like 2 weeks ago or a week ago, a lot of people in this chat, a lot of Notre Dame fans didn't think that they could beat North Carolina. Now it's like they're going to beat BYU by 30 and and it's just like, hey, can we pump the brakes? Because there's still a lot we have to learn about this football team. And, North Carolina is a very good offense, a very bad defense. And again, one game doesn't mean that you've arrived, you've turned the corner. You're all of a sudden this great football team. It means that you've started to take a turn. Now, Cal's shown to be a pretty good football team. Their offense kind of blew up. Notre Dame shut their run game down. A week later, they go out and run for almost 300 yards against Arizona. Jaden Knott has over 200 yards. Could that be just because Notre Dame's really good? We've seen Marshall struggle. I think they've lost both of their games since playing Notre Dame, right? They're 0-2 since playing Notre Dame. Ohio State has blasted people since playing Notre Dame. I think we can all agree that Notre Dame is not nearly as bad as they looked against Marshall. And that was the frustrating thing, Ryan. It's like, well, because of how they played against Marshall, that's who they're going to play all year, and this team may go 4-8. A lot of that was just nonsense, to be honest with you. But I understood it. And just because they blasted North Carolina doesn't mean Notre Dame's going to go on this run where they're just going to blow everybody else out over the next 8 weeks. And that's kind of, it's like, hey, let's pump the brakes a little bit and realize that this is a talented football team that still has holes, but also has the potential to get rolling. And I think, Ryan, that's kind of what we want to discuss today is what are the things that they got to continue to improve upon to get better? Because if they play like they did against North Carolina the next 8 weeks, they're going to win at least 5 games, right? I'd argue you'd say maybe 6. But look, BYU is still going to be tough if they play the way they did against Carolina because, again, big plays, mistakes, missed opportunities. The points you left on the board against North Carolina get you beat if you leave those points on the board against BYU or Clemson or USC. Right, the mental mistakes you made again on defense against North Carolina can get you beat against BYU, Clemson, and USC. So we're going to discuss about those aspects of it, and we're going to discuss just areas where this team needs to continue to get better, Ryan. And let's start on the offense because I think that's the side of the ball that is the problem. The defense has been far from great, Ryan. It's been good, but I think we both agree that this team is 2-2 because the offense hasn't come to play the way it needs to. so far this season.
Yeah. It's been a really kind of Jekyll and Hyde team so far, Brian. I mean, honestly, like it's something where offensively you saw against North Carolina what I think that you were expecting kind of all year. I mean, at least in the preseason, like you're expecting, hey, Notre Dame's going to be able to create some explosive plays. You saw like the long touchdown to Lorenzo Styles, for instance. You saw a few explosive runs from the running backs. You know, like you saw Audric Estime with a few chunk plays. You saw Logan Diggs with a couple chunk plays in the passing game, including one for a touchdown. It's just, for whatever reason, the first few games, though, it seems like everything was just kind of hard for Notre Dame. You know, like nothing came easy. Every big play they made, it was like it was just they. I mean, because you were there for the Marshall game, right? It's like Notre Dame got a 5-yard run, and it felt like they got a 20. It felt like it was like for 10, 15 yards. You're just like, a 5-yard run should not be that difficult, you know?
Right.
Like
against Marshall.
Exactly. Yeah. It was just, for whatever reason, everything looked incredibly difficult. Now, against North Carolina, it looked a lot easier. And there's some reasons for that, right? One is, I think Notre Dame was more efficient. I think they did their job much better for what they can control. But then they did play against a bad defense. They did, right? So, but I think for me, it's the efficiency needs to definitely improve. You need to be able to create some explosive plays. If not, this 3 yards, 4 yards in a cloud of dust mantra, like it's not sustainable, right? Like I just don't think that this is a sustainable way for Notre Dame to win. So they need to create explosive plays. You saw it more in North Carolina, but again, it needs to keep continuing throughout the season now consistently.
The reality is too, Ryan, is look, yes, North Carolina is bad, but there was a lot of plays out there that Notre Dame didn't make against Cal that weren't about Cal. They were about Notre Dame. I mean, Cal didn't do anything to make Drew Pine throw the ball into the ground. They didn't miss Michael Mayer on the seam. It didn't do any of those things. It didn't do anything to cause Notre Dame not to pick up certain twists or stunts. It was more about Notre Dame. Having said that, against Carolina, they didn't make those mistakes. When those opportunities were there, they did make those plays. And that's the key, right? That's the key of this whole thing is, look, the opportunities were there against Ohio State. They didn't make the plays. The opportunities were there against Marshall. They didn't make the plays. They started to make those plays against Cal, right? Especially like late in the first half and then the second half. And then for the most part, they missed those opportunities. But again, even against Carolina, there was the, Michael Mayer wide open on the sideline, missing that play. Different things like that. But so the reason I'm nitpicking the Carolina game a little bit is because, folks, Notre Dame has not arrived yet this year. No. And that's a good thing, right? That is not the best of what Notre Dame can be. They left at least 17 points on the board and should have kept Carolina 14 points off the board. Just Notre Dame mistakes were a 28-point swing and turned what could have been a 63-17 game into a 45-32 game, right? And that's the point that we're trying to make is this team needs to get better, but more importantly, it can get better. Yes. And I think that's the important thing to look at, and that's the exciting thing, and that's what the focus will be on today. And offensively, I think that's the biggest area. If the offense simply just plays way better and the defense just stays where it's been, Notre Dame goes, in my opinion, at least 6-2 down the stretch, at least 6-2, potentially 7-1. In order for them to run the table completely, they both have to play better. But offensively, Ryan, I still believe for all the stuff about Tommy Rees's game plan the first 2 weeks, and it was bad. The play of the quarterbacks the first 3 weeks, really, and it was bad. The play of the receiving core, even still. I mean, we're talking about a wide open seam route and a couple little slide routes is about all the receiving core did last week. It was better, but it's not like it just shows how low the bar was coming into this last game. We're excited about it. Yeah. But the reality is the key to the last 1.5 games, really 7 quarters, was the play of the offensive line. Their poor play fueled the struggles of the beginning, and their improvements over the last 2 games are because of that. Right, end of the day, we're talking about a lot of things. That's still the one group that's got to continue to play better. It's capable even more than we've seen, but it's been very good to see the last 2 weeks and them starting to take a turn, kind of turn that corner sharply. And they're going to need that group to be dominant in the last 8 games.
We've seen the game evolve over the years, Brian. I mean, obviously, the further we get into this like passing league that we're kind of seeing now in the NFL and still trickling down to the college football, it's become more wide open, manufacture space type of game at this point. But the one consistent, I think, no matter what area you're playing in, is that teams with really good offensive lines are usually pretty good football teams, man. Like that's like the baseline of everything, right? Like it's not a coincidence that when Notre Dame's offensive line plays better, their playmakers look better. Their quarterback play looks better. Like that's not a coincidence, folks. It's not. And you
Imagine that.
Yeah. It's right. Even just recent history of Notre Dame, like when has Notre Dame been good? When they have really good offensive lines. Like it's not a coincidence. And I think you saw again in the Cal game, things started looking a little bit easier than the first couple games. What was the movement forward, right? Offensive line played better. And then offensive line wise against North Carolina, it was the best they looked all year. And again, there was an asterisk next to this game, right? Like it wasn't. We don't have to keep saying it. The North Carolina defense
did what a good offensive line is supposed to do against a bad front seven, and they dominated them.
They did dominate.
That's the key.
Yep. From start to finish, it was the best game that we've basically seen from every player up front, in my opinion. Like I don't think that there was an offensive lineman that you could look at and said like he was the same or he took a step back. Like for in my opinion, from left tackle all the way over to right tackle, I think every player showed monumental improvement during the North Carolina game, and I think that that's why you saw the explosive runs. I think that's why you saw Drew Pine get more comfortable back there because let's be honest, Drew Pine basically didn't get touched all day. It was a great exhibition of pass blocking. They got a pretty consistent push up front. It was a step in the right direction. So it's not a coincidence that your offensive line is starting to play better and your offense is now also starting to play better. And that's the biggest thing is when you look at what we thought could be a real big strength of this team, Brian, like in the preseason, offensively or defensively, we're like, hey, man, there's a lot of talent on the offensive line. With Harry Heastan coming in, that's a unit that we need to be able to depend on if you're Notre Dame. And in North Carolina, it certainly showed the makings of a really good offensive line. But again, you're going to be playing some better defenses coming up here. So you need to continue to have exponential growth because that's the way that you're going to be able to win some of these games.
The confidence I have in this group starting to turn the corner not only comes from the dominance over North Carolina, and they could have run for 400 yards in that game if they wanted to. I mean, they really could have. I was glad to see them because what's the one thing you and I warned against going into that game? We warned against the notion of don't just go out there and bully North Carolina because you can. Still strive for balance, and they did that. I mean, I'll commend Tommy Rees for that. They did that. They didn't just come out there and say, look, these guys stink. We're just going to run it through them. We're going to just get out of the bye week with a W or get out of the week, this game with a W, go to the bye week and figure some stuff out. They started to figure stuff out last week. So they did have Drew Pine did throw 30-plus passes. They still did run the ball. Now, they built around the running backs a lot of that in the past game, but they took their shots down the field. They didn't do what they could have done to win that game, which is grind it out, slow the clock down. I mean, they took some shots. I mean, even early in the game, the 39-yard gain to Logan Diggs and different things where that was clearly game planned for that opportunity. That play was designed to potentially free him up. There were some shots that were designed in that game, so it wasn't a conservative game plan. I was happy to see that. Yeah. But none of that necessarily is where my confidence comes from. My confidence comes from because for the last really 2.5 quarters against what I believe is a pretty good Cal front seven, they were pushing Cal around.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what I like to see because that's a much bigger D line than Carolina. It's a much better coached defensive line than Carolina, a lot stronger defensive line than Carolina. It's not as athletic as the Carolina kids, but athleticism isn't what I'm worried about with this Notre Dame offensive line. It's can they move people? And so that's really that combined with the North Carolina game is what gives me confidence, Ryan, about this offensive line. If it was just Carolina and they'd struggle for 3 weeks, I feel way less confident that was a real turnaround. It was what they did against Cal for me that said, okay, it's what Kerry Heastan is teaching them is starting to show up on Saturday, and that's important.
Yes. And the last two defensive lines and just front sevens that Notre Dame has played are much different styles as well, too, Brian, which I think also gives you hope because it's like, you went into the Cal game. We talked about the Correa kid at nose tackle that's like 335 pounds. You talked about the two inside linebackers, Jackson Sermon and number 10, that were good football players, but they're more physical downhill players. Notre Dame in the second half, they dominated that front seven. They did. And they really, in my opinion, flash the physicality that they need to be able to move bigger bodies and to be able to be confident at the point of attack. The game against North Carolina, while they might not be nearly as technically sound or as strong as they are, they do have a lot more speed, to your point, right? They're a much more bendy, kind of explosive front seven. And Notre Dame matched the speed in that situation, and they also were able to maintain that physicality. So it shows me that there is growth happening up front, because you go from 1 week to a power-based team, you dominate them in the second half, and then you go into a more explosive, kind of twitchy defensive unit, and you're still able to do the same thing, just in a different kind of perspective, right? So I think that the last 2 weeks are really good signs for the offensive line. It really shows you, I think it showed you a lot of, hey, the offensive tackles that we thought were going to be studs, I thought against North Carolina, you really started to see them both put it together. I mean, Joe Alt's been fantastic the last couple of weeks. And you saw, I think that the biggest takeaway, and the thing that has me the most positive, is that I thought that was easily, by far, the best games I've seen Zeke Correll and Josh Lugg play this season by a landslide, right? Like, they played good football. And I would argue that Jared Patterson might have played the best game of his career. Like, I would go that far, good. Man. Yeah. I thought he was really good in that football.
Only reason I have a hard time saying that is because of how bad Carolina is.
That's fair.
But you know what the thing about Jared is? This is the game, Ryan, and this is where I'm going to come from on this one. It was without question the best game he's played at guard. He's only played 2, really, or 3. But we saw why he moved to guard in this game, because what this game allowed him to do is move a lot more, and it allowed him to get in, on some of the movement blocks, to pull. It allowed him to work to the second level a little bit more. It allowed him to just come off the line and drive. That was the thing for me. This is the most physical game I've ever seen Jared Patterson play. And that can be somewhat independent of who you're playing. You can see a guy really ripping his hips. You can see a guy really get movement. And as a center, it can be harder to do that. And I think that is what I would say is definitely his most physical game, and definitely was indicative of, okay, here's why we moved him to guard, if from a coaching standpoint, because his athleticism flashed in this game, and considering he's still coming back from the foot injury, is a great sign. He's not 100% yet. So I thought that was a big sign for me. And him and Joe Alt together are really impressive. The thing I liked is, for the first time all season, we expected the right side to be the movement side. Big old Josh Lugg, 6'7", 316. Blake Fisher, 6'6", 325. That's the side we expected to move people. And for the first 3 games, they didn't move anybody. The success they had in the run game against Cal was mostly based on the center back to the left tackle, more so the left side. Zeke had a couple nice plays here and there. What we saw in this game is Zeke continues to ascend, right? I think he's gotten better each game. He was not very good against Ohio State. He was not very good against Marshall, but still better. He was good but inconsistent against Marshall or against Cal, and he was just flat out good against North Carolina. He's gotten better each week, and I think that the big thing, though, is the right side moved people. Yeah, for the first time all season, we saw the right side move people. Again, it's it's UNC, so I need to see it against BYU and Stanford and Syracuse and moving forward. But that was a positive sign, and I hope it wasn't just because of who North Carolina is. I hope it's because of that group is just starting to figure it out, playing together. But if that's the case, Ryan, then we're going to be okay here with Notre Dame, because the offensive line still has to fuel everything, right? And that's going to be a big key.
I think the second half of BYU, Brian, I mean against BYU, the second half against Cal, I think that really kind of infused a little bit of confidence. I really think so. I think that for the first time all season, Notre Dame offensive line wise was kind of like, hey guys, we're pretty big and we're pretty physical when we want to be, right? Like, we can do this. And I think that you saw Blake Fisher with a little bit of a pep in his step in this past game. Like, you saw him smiling after plays where he's just dominating dudes, right? Like, you see there, it just looks different from that.
He played like someone who got embarrassed.
Yes.
He played like a guy that has a lot of pride in himself, and I mean that in a positive way, that flat got embarrassed with how he played the 2 weeks before. And he, like you said, Ryan, he played with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And not like in a negative, late hitting guys. Or playing dirty. Like, oh yeah, you yell at me, I'll show you. I'll drive this guy to the ground or hit him in the back or some immature thing like that. It was like, you know what? My pride got challenged. my game got challenged. My manhood got challenged, so to speak, in this week of preparation. And I'm going to go out and show everybody that I'm still Blake Fisher. I'm still the most talented dude here. I'm still, and there's things he's got to improve upon, as you said to me after the game. Like, he's still too inconsistent. But see, that's the stuff I can live with. Because, again, he has 6 starts under his belt. The North Carolina game was just his 6th career start. I can live with, okay, he missed his assignment on that one. Oh, he didn't move his feet well. No, that stuff I can live with. It's when he looked lost, confused, not playing physical. That's the stuff that bothered me, because that's not indicative of experience. So that stuff was the positive for me, Ryan. It was, I can live with the mistakes. I can. For a kid who's made 6 starts, he still doesn't have as many career starts as Joe Alt had coming into this season, right? So there's going to be a little bit of that, but it's just less and less each game is really where you want to see with Blake. But the physicality was better. I thought he was more patient in the pass game, but more physical in the run game. And that's a big thing for Blake, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think, Brian, for me, like, just kind of the over-encompassing thing about this offensive line is Jared Patterson looked like he was starting to get into a nice rhythm. Like, he looked physical. He looked like he was confident in what he was doing. It was a great step coming back from injury. Zeke Corral and Josh Luck did exactly what we talked about all offseason. Like, they just need to be good, man. Like, they just need to be solid. I don't want to notice those cats. Like, they're fine. They're solid. They're good football players. They do their job. What you've seen now from the tackles, though, is what we've been so excited about. Like, you've seen the flashes now the last 2 games, game and a half, of Blake Fisher when he wants to be great, or when he plays with a little bit of an edge to him. He's a dominant player, man. Like, it's all there. And again, Notre Dame has not played. They played against a good Cal defense, and they played against a bad UNC offense. So you need to see it at a much higher sample size. But, Brian, we're seeing, in my opinion, Joe Alt starting to ascend into being that guy that we thought he could be, right? Like, potential All-American Joe Alt. Like, I think he's playing that well over the last 2 games. Now, it needs to be for a full season, for a full scope of games. But you're seeing the 2 young guns at offensive tackle, especially, in my opinion, they're really starting to ascend to the talent level that we know they have, it's great to see. It's absolutely great to see.
Ryan, I know you didn't do this on purpose, but that was a great segue to my next point.
Nice.
We're going to talk about the quarterbacks and the running backs and all that kind of stuff. But I don't care that they had success offensively against a terrible North Carolina defense. Oh, the offense looked great and the scheme was good and all this kind of stuff. It is even more inexcusable with how bad Carolina is that you didn't play Tobias Merriweather for a single frigging snap. Not one. And here's the thing that bothers me. I do know this to be true. They worked on stuff with him during the week of the last 2 games and had a package for him. I'm told that by multiple sources. Why are you wasting reps with that if you're not going to flip them playing? It is inexcusable, in my opinion. Now, what we're going to hear is the trust thing. And I'm sorry, this offense will not get to where it needs to get to if they don't play their best players. And if Tobias Merriweather and Eli Raridan aren't major focal points of this offense moving forward, if they don't continue to make Chris Tyree a key focal point of this offense, because shocker, as they've used Chris Tyree more, the offense has gotten better, and Audric has been better, and Logan has been better when they're countering off of Chris Tyree. If we don't see Tyree continue to be what he's been the last couple of weeks, it's been good so far. But if we don't then see Tobias Merriweather and Eli Raridan not only playing, but getting the football, this team cannot reach its full potential. And if Tommy Rees is going to continue, and look, I've defended Coach Rees a lot. I like Coach Rees. I think he's got a lot of talent and a lot of potential as an offensive coordinator. But his stubbornness that is rooted in his growing up under Brian Kelly has got to flip and go. If the offense is too complicated for Tobias Merriweather to earn a single snap, he's not the problem. You are. And I keep hearing this stuff about, look, it's got to be, got to trust you to do the right thing. We have a small margin for error, blah, 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 blah. Okay. I'm sorry. You're telling me Tobias can't allow himself to get outplayed for a hitch route that goes back for a pick 6 and a loss. He's not, you can't trust him to do that. You can't trust him to drop a crossing route on a 3rd and 4, in a game where, you're trying to go out and move the ball. You can't trust him to block somebody in the back to negate a long run by your quarterback. You can't trust him to go half speed on routes that he knows he's not getting the ball, like we're seeing from Lorenzo Styles. That's you can't trust him to get an offensive pass interference. Hey, Tobias could go in there and get an offensive pass interference against Ohio State and kill a drive. He's more than capable of that, right? This whole thing of like, I got to trust you. None of the receivers that you've put on the field on Saturday through the first 4 games have deserved anybody's trust over another player that has more talent than any of them. That's nonsense. And I can trust. What can you trust Jaden Thomas to do? Run slide routes like that anyone on the roster can do? I think Jaden Thomas deserves to have a role on this football team. I think Matt Salerno deserves to have a role on this football team. Okay, no question. But the fact that they have Jaden Thomas averaging over 40 snaps a game, based on what? He's not a great blocker so far, and all he can do is get open on quick stuff that's scheme oriented. He's no threat down the field. He gets no separation down the field. He doesn't know how to run through aggressive coverage. He doesn't know how to get off the line of scrimmage. What exactly has he earned? You know what it is, Ryan? He knows the plays. That's it. That's it. And it comes down to, then you're making a lot of money. You're making 7 figures, right? You turned down this huge contract from LSU. Miami wanted you, blah, 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 blah. It's not about talent with Tobias, and it's not about talent with Tommy Rees. Tommy Rees is a really smart guy. He's got to understand that this is still college football. And in college football, it's much more about the talent on your team than what's in here for you. And you got to figure out a way to get Tobias on the field, because at this point in time, the fact that he has zero touches in 4 games and has only played 4 snaps in 4 games is not a Tobias Merriweather problem. I don't care what anybody says. It's a Tommy Rees problem, and it's a Marcus Freeman problem, because you're the head coach. You need to go into his office. This conversation should have already been had. And he's going to say, look, man, I understand he doesn't know the whole playbook, and I understand but we need to live with those mistakes, just like we lived with Braden's mistakes and Lorenzo's mistakes and Matt Salerno's mistakes and Jaden Thomas's mistakes. They're all making mistakes, but you know what? None of them are, Ryan? 6'4", fast, and really talented. None of them are that. They have 0 outside vertical threat. I think Braden Lindsey can be a big-time vertical threat in the right usage, but it's not as a W, right? It's not as that. And the fact is if he doesn't play against BYU, and I'm talking like 20 snaps plus, and doesn't get targeted in normal time, then I'm gonna lose it, because you're handicapping yourself, because you're still trying to show everyone that it's about how smart you are instead of how talented your players are. And if you can't find that happy medium, then you're just not doing this college football. This is college football, not NFL. Tobias isn't a rookie 2nd-round draft pick that had a $700,000 signing bonus. He's an 18-year-old college freshman who's really talented. Just like there's not another top team that couldn't get a kid like that to football. Do you see the Williams kid from Clemson? He's making plays. Kobe Prentice from Alabama, he wasn't even their highest ranked receiver. People talk, Alabama gets these 5-star players and blah, 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 blah. That's not Kobe Prentice. Like, he was ranked kind of close to where Tobias is. He was like in the 80s from everybody. He's not a 5-star recruit. The Williams kid from Clemson, right? He wasn't that kind of 5-star, Jerry Jeudy type of guy. He was a top 75 to 100 type of player, which is very similar to what Tobias is. These guys can get on the field and make play after play, but Tobias can't even get a hitch route. So that's my rant. I went on it for a long time. I'm sick of this, to be honest with you, Ryan. I'm sick of the players being held back. And in this era, here's something that always protected Brian Kelly in the past. You didn't have the automatic transfer rule. You do now. And so if you're not willing to get this kid ready to go, and then here's the thing. Eventually, Braylon James, Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, Dylan Edwards, and Tayshawn Lyons are going to take notice to be like, you guys keep telling me that I'm going to get a chance to play as a freshman, but that dude can't get in the game over Jaden Thomas and Matt Salerno. Guess what, Ryan? Those guys are going to all be back next year.
Yep.
Right? So what's to say that if you're not going to play them over, if you're going to play them over Tobias, what makes us think that you're going to play them over me? Mm-hmm. Right? And so until that changes, then this is always, it's going to be the same old story. They're going to dominate teams they're supposed to, like crap defense like North Carolina, but they're never going to reach their potential as an offense. And that's up to Coach Reese. And if he's willing to make that change, then guess what? This offense is going to explode, because it's not just about Tobias and Eli. And we're talking about Tobias. Same is true for Eli Raritan, because let's be real. Eli and Holden don't play as much as they did last week if Kevin Bauman doesn't get hurt. It shouldn't take a kid getting hurt for you to get studs on the field like every other big-time school does. Yep. And that's what I'm tired of, to be honest with you.
Brian, I think it's such a contradictory thing when people say, because you talked about Coach Reese, right? Like, he wants to show, what his acumen is as a football mind. He kind of wants to flash his ability. But in my opinion, if you're a great coach, getting a player that maybe doesn't know the full playbook and scheming them open and getting them involved, I think that's great coaching, man. That shows that you are very creative, in my opinion, right? So I think that's very inconsistent line of thinking, very contradictory. And I'll say this, Brian, you mentioned a phrase that I absolutely hate. You said that there is a smaller margin for error. When you increase the margin for error? When you have a 6'4" wide receiver with vines. Like, that's where you increase the margin for error, man. Especially because this is not shade at Drew Pine. I promise it's not. But Drew Pine does not have the strongest arm in the world, Brian. Right. He doesn't, right? He's not going to hit these crazy small windows. He's not going to do that.
Not what makes you right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, against the really good teams. Like, he's not going to hit some of these smaller windows. But what increases your chance to complete those small window throws? Length, athleticism, springiness as an athlete. Tobias Merriweather is one of those kids that even when he's covered, he's not actually covered. Like, he's one of those guys, right? 50-50 balls become 80-20 balls with this type of football player. So I hate you have a small margin for error conversation, because who gives you a smaller margin for error? Again, I'm not throwing shade at a Salerno right now. I'm not Salerno. I'm not. But a 6 foot, 190-pound wide receiver or a 6'4", 190-pound receiver, which one gives you a bigger margin for error? I mean, it's just common sense, right? And if this was a situation where, hey, they're different body types, but Matt Salerno is to this level talent-wise, and Tobias Merriweather's look right there, they're in the same ballpark, this would be a completely different conversation. But the fact of the matter is that it's not a conversation. We know who the more talented player is. We know who the more lengthy athletic player is. It's just not great right now, man. Like, there's zero reason, in my opinion, not to get Tobias Merriweather a look. He needs to be involved in this offense. It's very confusing. I don't fully understand it, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing about Deion Colsey getting a role, which we started to see at least a little bit. He played 4 snaps against North Carolina in the second half. He has been coming back from injury. That one I understand a little bit more, but that is something that we need to see as well, Ryan. And I think part of the reason I focus on these two kids is not only because they're the two most talented players you have on offense from a pass catching standpoint, like tight ends, receivers behind Michael Mayer, is Tobias and Eli Raritan. Now, again, they're freshmen. Yes. You can't ask them to run the full thing. And it shouldn't be, it like a veteran or you don't play. That there's got to be a happy medium like there is for every other good team in college football. So, for me, it's about finding that sweet spot, because as you said, Eli and Tobias are both guys that can help Drew Pine out a bunch. They're both guys that his team start to try to find more and more ways to slow down Michael Mayer, which is growing increasingly difficult, with the way that Notre Dame is moving him around and just the level he's playing at right now. Those are the kind of guys that can hurt you and give Drew Pine that confidence. Because as you said, I'll speak as a quarterback, okay, because that's the position I played. When I have a receiver that I know I don't have to be pinpoint accurate to get the ball to, it makes me a lot more confident as a quarterback, especially when I'm getting pressured. Right, especially if I'm not sure of what I'm saying. Like, okay, I don't know what I'm saying here, but I know there's one safety, and I got Tobias on one side, and I got Mayer on the other side, so I'm just going to read that one safety and throw it where he ain't. Right? Because this is your point. You now put 2 guys on the field now that are, dude, I don't care if he's covered, just give him a chance. And we saw that Drew is willing to do that. That was the biggest thing for me that came out of Saturday's game for Drew Pine. It's not that, that he's accurate or that he can make good reads on slide routes. Like, Drew was never the guy that just short hopped 2 balls against Cal. That was dude making his first start. He was jittery. He was nervous. he played like a guy that was making his first career start and had the weight of the world on his shoulders because Notre Dame was 0-2. That's how Drew played. What we saw against Carolina is kind of what we thought Drew would be. It's why you and I said Notre Dame's a 10-2 football team if Drew Pine's a starting quarterback, because we thought he can be that guy. But Drew is not a guy that's going to go put the team on his shoulders, a la Trevor Lawrence, a la Justin Fields or Bryce Young or all these other guys, and say, hey, I'm going to will you to victory with my God-given ability physically. He's going to need the talent around him, and then let him be a point guard. And what we saw against North Carolina on a couple throws, especially the one to Mayer on that 3rd and 10, is if he trusts you, he will just throw that sucker out to you and let you go get it.
Yep.
There were times he was unwilling to pull the trigger when Mayer wasn't his primary read. When Mayer was one of his first 2 reads, Ryan, you could see it from the press box. He was like, dude, I'm just going to let him clear, and then I'm just going to throw it to him because I know he's going to catch it wherever I throw it. And he threw some balls to him that weren't on point, right? Coupled behind him, but Mayer caught it. But then on that 3rd and 10, he just said, throw it up. I'm going to throw it at like 9 feet, and the only person who can catch is Michael Mayer. Because why? He had the confidence Mayer was going to do that. Now you give him a couple other 6'4", 6'6" weapons, and all of a sudden Drew Pine becomes a much more confident quarterback. And one of the things that Notre Dame is going to have to do a better job of, and this is how it all ties together, Notre Dame has to be a more effective vertical passing team. I'm not saying they need to be a team built around the vertical passing game, but I was glad to see Drew take some chances against Carolina down the field. I was glad to see Tommy Rees scheme some shots down the field. I still don't understand why Tobias Merriweather, of all the receivers you have, why Jaden Thomas is the guy that you're trying to design a backside post to. Different conversation for a different day. But at least Drew took the shot and took the chance, and he needs to get it out there a little bit more and all that kind of stuff. But they were willing to take some chances. But Drew, like you said, is not a guy that's going to sit back and launch a 60-yard over-the-top post throw. He's not a guy that's going to drop a 50-plus yard, outside go route back shoulder like Mac Jones or Bryce Young or Trevor Lawrence, right? He's just not that kid. Drew has a lot of strengths. That's not one of them. But what can make him better? Giving him some trees to throw the football to. Like Drew Pine's ideal receiving core was the one in 2018. It was, and that's why that was Ian Book's best year. Ian Book's best year by far was 2018 for a million reasons, but one of the primary reasons is in 2018, and his second best year, in my opinion, at least at times when he was on, was 2019. And why? Because he had Chase Claypool and Cole Kmet to throw to in 2019. In 2018, he had Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, and Alize Mack to throw to, and Cole Kmet off the bench. And Chris Fink was a great route runner that knew how to get open. But there were games where you could just see, Ryan, he was just like, I'm going to throw it to Miles and Chase all day, right? And he had confidence that, hey, I can just throw it out there, and they're going to go make a play. Drew needs that kind of help too. And there's only 2 guys at receiver that can give you that, right? Deion Colsey and Tobias Merriweather. Need to see more of them. That doesn't mean no Jaden Thomas. It doesn't mean no Matt Salerno. They should both play. In roles, they should both play. They just shouldn't have the prominent roles that they have now, especially Jaden Thomas. But the tight ends are the other guys. Eli Raridan and Holden Stace give you that as well. So you have to build around the quarterback you have now, not the quarterback you thought you were going to have all offseason, right? And with Drew Pine as your quarterback, you need to kind of rethink who you are and say, we've got to get some size in there. And now all of a sudden you've got some size to take the pressure off of Braden Lindsey. You can now use him on things that he should be getting used on. And I think it allows you to move Lorenzo Styles inside. He has the body of a guy that should be playing X, but for whatever reason, Lorenzo doesn't know how to play X that well. He just doesn't. His production mainly comes inside. And until you can get him there, right, you need to figure out a way to get him inside more. What's a good way to get him inside more? Having more outside guys that are legitimate weapons. Because you can't just put him inside all the time. Then you only have one legitimate outside vertical threat, and that's Braden Lindsey, who's an outside vertical threat on a limited number of type of things. He's not a guy going to put a boundary and say, go win off the line. And that's just not who he is. That's not a fault on Braden Lindsey. You got to use him correctly. So that's another reason those guys can help. It's not just about play your best guys. That's true. But practically speaking, who this team needs to be throwing the football, you need that presence to maximize your offense. And as the running backs become more focal points of the opposition too, Ryan, those kind of big guys are going to get more and more one-on. I mean, think about it. You got to worry about the running backs, They're going 22 personnel. Notre Dame will go 22 personnel, and all 5 dudes are pass game weapons. Who in the country can do that right now? Who can go 22 personnel and line up and go right up and down the field out of empty? Or a back in the backfield with everybody else spread out. There's really like what? Georgia, Notre Dame. Was that it?
Yeah, I know. I was really trying to rack my brain because I'm like, Alabama only has Latu, right? So like they don't have the
They
second
could have
tight
maybe
end.
done it last year with Billingsley, right? Last year with Billingsley, they could have done it, right?
Sure.
But
maybe Texas, I guess, could do that a little bit, but sure.
Yeah. Not like Notre Dame could do it.
Not like Notre Dame.
But that's
not
the point. And so it gives you some unique things. So put a Tobias out there. And like when you're in 22 personnel, Tobias Merriweather should be your one receiver, but you should at least have Eli Raritan out there. So there's just a lot of different aspects to this, Ryan, that it's not just about play your dudes and all that. It's also, practically speaking, this is who this Notre Dame football team needs to be now that Drew Pyne's your starting quarterback, because Drew can win you a bunch of games. There's not a team left in the schedule that you can't beat with Drew Pyne. Not a one. It's just, your margin for error is a little bit thinner, but you're looking at the wrong margin for error as the head coach. And I think you nailed that beautifully, Ryan. The margin for error is self-imposed because you're putting dudes who can't get themselves open on the field. That's where the margin for error comes from. I think you nailed that wonderfully when you said it earlier.
That's also contradictory too, though, if we're thinking about it, right? Not what you said, but just kind of that thought process, because if you think that your quarterback gives you a smaller margin for error, why wouldn't you put the more margin for error around him, right? Like overcompensate. That's exactly right. I mean, it's weird, man. I love that you mentioned Eli Raritan, especially with how much 22 personnel Notre Dame is running, because, I mean, it's such a mismatch to have a tight end that could be a seam runner and a tight end that could be like a short intermediate pass catcher together, right? Like both those guys can do both those things. I mean, Mayer can run the seam. Mayer could be the underneath route runner. I know that Eli Raritan, based upon his high school film, can definitely run the seam, Brian. Like he's a really good athlete, man. And it's so weird because where Eli Raritan is winning right now is not necessarily where I would have projected him winning early on in his career based on his high school film. You know, like I know there was willingness as a blocker, but like Notre Dame wanted him, and we were so high on him because of the weapon that he can be in the passing game. And we haven't seen him involved in that aspect yet. I think it's going to happen soon. Like I have to think it's going to happen soon, where like just off of a play action, you just get a quick seam throw, or you get it, off of a delay, just hit him in the flat type of thing. Like I think it's coming soon. But I mean, all that to say is like you have so much mismatched potential when you have a Michael Mayer and an Eli Raritan together, because they can mix and match. They can do both things. Like they're not one-dimensional tight ends where Eli is just a seam runner and he can't do anything underneath. Like they both can do whatever they want on the field from an athletic perspective. So using them together, again, increase the margin for error. 6'4.5", 6'6". Tobias Merriweather outside, 6'4". Now you're talking about your slot position, which is usually your smaller position, being potentially a 6'1" Lorenzo Styles, and that's a bigger slot, right? Like that's a little bit of a longer slot. So I agree with you, especially if you think that there's a smaller margin for error with the quarterback. You have to overcompensate in other ways, and the other ways to compensate is to get guys like Merriweather, Raritan, those guys with massive frames and huge upside athletically. Get them on the field, and I hope we see it. I hope. I mean, I don't know if we will, but I'm very much hoping, Brian. Very much hoping.
Here's something, Ryan, too, offensively. Last part of this is I've loved what Tommy Rees has done with his backs the last 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. I have. And, he'll ride, like he rode Chris Tyree early. Right. This is like the plan. It's funny listening to the BYU game last night. They were talking about it was Louis Riddick was on there. Well, Louis Riddick played against Notre Dame back when Rocket Ismail was in college. So he played against them when they had Ricky Waters and Rocket Ismail, and he was spot on last night because Lou Samoji used to talk about this all the time. When Rocket, especially in year 2 and year 3, 89 and 90, they would kind of have Anthony Johnson and Rodney Culver, and you had Ricky Waters in 89 and 90 at running back, and they would kind of ride those guys early. And then the second half, he'd put Rocket back there, and they'd run off tackle, they run toss, and it's just kind of like you've been worn down, and then they put the burner in, right? And so you would ride different guys at different times, and we're seeing Tom Rees do that. You're riding a lot of Chris. We hardly saw Audric Estime in the first half. He had one carry in the first half.
I
right?
think so too. It was near the end of the first half, Brian. He had that 129-yard run, and I was like, wow, he's only run the ball one time in the first half. I was shocked a little bit.
But then the second half, they come out and they're riding more. And I don't think that was a halftime adjustment because we saw the same thing against Cal the week before. It's, Aldrich to me seems like he's wears down a little bit. Like gas wise, not physicality wise, but like he doesn't have as many, because as he's still ascending, like he kind of looked a little worn down late in that game against North Carolina, which was interesting because he didn't play the first half hardly at all. So I think they're protecting his numbers a little bit, right? But I also think strategically, it's let's hit him with the lightning first, then come with the thunder, is what they've done so far, and I like that. And so we saw a lot of Chris Tyree and Logan Diggs early. Then they bring in Aldrich and let him hammer a team. We saw the same thing against Cal, and I like that they did against Carolina, and then they did it differently. I think they've altered their run game. They were trying to run a Mesa duo early in the year, and it wasn't working. They went away from that. They've altered their footwork. I complained a lot about how their counter footwork just was not working. They altered it a little bit. It's still not how I would have it, but it's better. And so to me, and you saw the timing of counter worked a little bit in this last game. Now it helped that you're playing North Carolina who can move off the ball, but you started to see the timing of the runs. They were a little bit more of the stretch stuff. Inside zone was still a piece of it. So they're building the run game. They're still tinkering the run game to see what works because it's got to work for the line and it's got to work for the backs. And so to me, that's a positive as well. So I love so we've hammered them for about, how they're using, not using Tobias and all that kind of stuff. But I loved what Tommy Reese did with the backs this past week, run game and pass game wise, and using those guys as threats. And then also here's the big key, Ryan, which we didn't see the first two games at all, knowing when to use them as decoys. Mm-hmm. And he's done that masterfully the last two games. Using Tyree on a motion to get Aldrich open on a run, or using Aldrich, Logan Diggs or it was Aldrich on a motion that then opens up Chris Tyree for a long. I mean, he's done a great job of that. So that is one thing, is if you can continue that and then add to it with a little bit Tobias, a little bit of Eli to go with you've got two strengths right now on the skill game, right? You got the best tight end in college football as a pass weapon. And you've got three running backs that now for 2 games in a row you've ridden, and they've been really good. So you got that. So now let's add to it. Get Lorenzo in the slot more. Continue to find different ways to get Ray Lindsey the ball. Get him on those crossers. Get him on some climbs. Get him on some things like that. But start using Tobias more, a little bit more Deion Colsey, using those guys more effectively in those packages. And then now all of a sudden you're like, wow, we have to defend everybody. And Notre Dame is capable of being that offense, Ryan. But right now, when they're in 11 personnel, in a lot of instances, there's at least 2 guys you don't have to worry about, right? And you can't be that. You're not going to beat BYU that way. You're not going to beat Clemson that way. You're not going to beat USC that way, right? And for all the people saying, "Oh, Utah, we should blow BYU out because look what they did to Utah State." First of all, Utah State's a decent football team. They're a well-coached football team. BYU did still win that game, I think, by double digits. And Notre Dame lost to Marshall. Okay,
yes.
Right? You know what I mean? So like, they still have a lot to prove, right? And beating up a bad North Carolina defense is not your arrived moment. It's a great step. Now build on it moment.
Right.
And so to me, I think, and final thing, and somebody just said in the chat, this was the first time all year we saw Logan Diggs be the guy that you and I think he can be. Yes. Now that you add him into this mix with Aldrich and Tyree, as long as Tyree is still the heart of it, especially early, this backfield is going to be really good, and it gives them something to build around. That's important.
I think we talked about it on the Upon Further Review show last week, Brian. Like someone had asked, out of the 3 running backs, it may have been on the Monday show, out of the 3 running backs, which one – who were you happiest to see have the game that they have? And I think that, your impulse is to say Audric Estime because of the 134 yards. But my initial thought was Logan Diggs, because he's a guy that's been dealing with an injury, been dealing with consistency. It just hasn't clicked yet this season, right?
Ryan, you and I had said earlier, like, do not play this kid until he's mentally right. Exactly. Because he was not right. And then he didn't play against Cal. didn't play snap against Cal, and he came back and looked like a completely different dude than we saw the first 2 games.
Yep.
Completely different dude.
He clearly had fresh legs, but like the biggest thing for me is that he looked confident, right? Like this was the game where, he had 50 something yards rushing on 10 carries. He had the two or three catches for 60 something yards and a touchdown. You were implementing different parts of his game into the game plan, but also for the first time, Brian, it really seemed like he was just confident in his role and confident in what he was doing. And I know that sometimes when you have a 3-headed monster, let's call it, right, 3 different types of skill sets, some people will say, well, how are you going to feed every one of the players? Well, after the game, you're like, okay, Audric Estime had 17 carries. Chris Tyree had 15 carries and a couple catches. You're looking at Logan Diggs. He had 10 carries and a couple catches. Like, you were able to spread the wealth,
right?
Give the hammer his momentum down the stretch in Audric Estime. Give Chris Tyree the carries early on to really get the game going a little bit as far as in the running aspect of the game and just in the space aspect of the game. And then you mixed in Logan Diggs, and I felt really happy for Logan because, like I said, man, like you saw glimpses as a freshman, and then you were excited about him. He gets hurt in the offseason. He comes back early in the season, and he doesn't look right. And for the first time this season, he looked right. And when you mix and match all these different skill sets, 230-pound Estime, with the lightning quick, explosive Chris Tyree, with Logan Diggs, who is kind of the best of both worlds, brings a little bit of everything to the table. They all mix so well together. So it's been really cool to see the maturation of the running back unit because I feel like they were hindered by the offensive line early on in the year. But the last game and a half, especially, the last 2 games, you're really starting to see the best of what the running backs can give. I mean, this game, if this North Carolina victory was any indication of how good this running back room could be and just how good this rushing attack could be, how versatile they could be, how just different they could be from a snap-to-snap basis, then Notre Dame's going to be in a good spot because the other thing is not only is it a good spot for the rest of the season, all these guys have more eligibility after this year too. So talk about building for the future. The running back room should be very good for the next couple of seasons.
Technically, Tyree still has 3 years left.
It's crazy.
I don't see him using because his first year is the COVID year, and so technically now that 3 includes this year, so it's 2 after this year. So technically, him and all this is crazy. Chris Tyree and Logan Diggs have the same amount of eligibility left. So because of the COVID year. But what you just said, Ryan, was really good because here's the other thing that about this. What you just said and what you nailed, in my opinion, is just more evidence as to why you need to have big play receivers. And like, here's the thing. They have a volume type of receiving situation here where Jaden Thomas is going to catch more passes, but not for a lot of yards. I mean, you kind of had Lorenzo doing a little bit of that. Salerno's more of a chain mover type of guy. And you don't have enough, like when you're doing all the stuff you're doing for the running backs, and I'm not talking run game. I'm talking pass game. I mean, you look at how they used the backs against Cal. They had 8 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. That was really good usage out of your running backs. Then you look at what they did against North Carolina, and the production was even greater. I mean, you had, I'm kind of doing the math right now as quick as I can. Yet 8 catches. No, I'm sorry. You had 7 catches for 89 yards and a touchdown in the pass game out of your backs. So you're getting a much higher level of production from your running backs in the pass game right now, and it could even be more. So you don't need receivers that can move the chains and do a bunch of those little things. Use your backs that way. Put receivers and tight ends in the field that can stretch the field to complement because this is about playing complementary football. Tobias, Deion Colsey, Lorenzo, Braden Lindsey, Eli Raridan, the Holden Stays, Kane Barong to a degree. All those guys complement your running backs and your quarterback. So there's really no argument you can make other than they know the offense better, which we've already dismissed how insane that is, to not play these other guys more. And if you can get Tobias going, because here's the key for me. You need to get Tobias going by November 5th. Now, that doesn't mean you wait till November 5th to play him. What I'm saying is you start getting him in the game against BYU. He doesn't need to have 8 catches for under 20 yards. If he does, great, but that's not what we're talking. Get him in the game for 20-plus snaps and get him the football. Then you've got Stanford. Then you've got UNLV. Then you have Syracuse. And the reality is If they play like they did against Cal in North Carolina, they beat all of those teams, right? All I'm talking about past BYU is what I'm referring to. Yep. It's like once you get past if you get past BYU with a win, with all due respect to Syracuse, who's doing it. I mean, Dino's doing a really good job with that football team this year. They've got a good defense. They're a quality football team. But if you play like you did against North Carolina and Cal, you're probably going to win that game, right? It may not be as pretty as you want, but you're going to win that game. You're going to beat Stanford. You're going to beat UNLV. And so then you start looking at it and say, okay, well now you're getting ready to go play UNLV or play Clemson, and now that's when you've really got to have those guys ready to play. Yep. And so if you can spend these next 4 games getting Tobias more and more and more a part of the offense, that's the last 4 games are going to need him, really the first and the fourth of that last final stretch. And so to me, you got to do it now because you're going to need him. You're going to need Eli Raridan. You're going to need Holden Stace. You're going to need some of those guys to make plays against those teams if you want to win. Clemson is the one defense that I see left on the schedule, athletic enough to say we're not going to let Michael Mayer beat us. Other teams can try. They're the only ones that have the personnel to maybe do it. And so you're going to then say, okay, fine, we're going to ride Jaden Thomas and Matt Salerno to victory. Right? No, you're not. Right? And so to me, that's why you need to, now, start getting Tobias. Yeah. It's a great compliment. He's your best, most talented player. It fits your quarterback. There's nothing but good reasons to get him going. It's got to happen now. It's got to happen now. And I'm hoping they've already done it during a bye week. They've already put the work in. But at some point in time, Tommy Rees got to say, hey, look, I'm going to give him a chance to go out there and play. I'm going to live with the mistakes. You got to live with hey, you were willing to let Jaden Thomas get picked off for a touchdown. You were willing to watch him get outplayed for a football with the game on the line and run back you were willing to accept that.
Against Marshall.
Right? You were willing to accept that. You were willing to accept Matt Salerno getting called for an offensive pass interference in a situation that you had a lead again on the road against Ohio State. You were willing to live with Braden Lindsey killing a drive because him and your quarterback weren't, on the same page, and he gets called for a false start. You were willing to live with all the stuff Lorenzo Styles has done this year, half speed routes, dropping 3rd and 4s, stuff like that. Not laying out for a football against Ohio State. You're willing to live with those mistakes, but Tobias doesn't go in motion once and he's done for the next 2 games. That's stupidity is what that is, right? Why is the freshman held to a higher standard than the older players? It should be the other way around. Yep. And it's insanity to me. So we spent most of our time talking about the offense, Ryan, for good reason, because that's the side of the ball that needs the most attention. As we said, if the Notre Dame defense plays like it did in 3 of the 4 games this year, they were not good against Marshall. Nobody was good against Marshall. But even then, they still held them to 19 points, right? But the reality is, because they scored 26, but pick 6, right? Doesn't count against your defense. It does on total scoring defense number, but it doesn't count against the defense. They've played good enough to be 4-0 right now, in my opinion, and they really have. And if they just play this way the rest of the year, they've got a chance to beat everybody. It'll be harder against Clemson and especially USC if you play this way, but they've played good enough to win. There are areas, however, where this group can be better. And I think the first one, Ryan, is we saw a good step forward at linebacker against North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Now, the measuring stick for the defense against Carolina is completely different than the offense against Carolina. That was a good measure. That's one of the best offenses you're going to face this year, right? It's definitely top 5, right? With Ohio State, with Clemson, with USC, and with BYU. Would you put anyone else in that top 5 other than that group? I would not.
I think you got it. Yeah.
Unless Boston College can play in a 7-on-7 game. If Boston College can remove line play out of that matchup, then maybe you could put Boston College in that conversation.
I think maybe Syracuse, maybe.
Offensive skill? No, I don't think. Offensively, no, I'm not going there yet. I love their run game. They just don't scare me enough on the perimeter, honestly.
I like that receiver they got, Aranda Gadsden Jr.
Yeah, I know. You just love him because he's a Aranda Gadsden kid and he's really tall.
Man, he's a good player, man. He's a good player.
Hold on a second, man. Let's talk about Aranda Gadsden real quick because I want to. You've got a young, tall, athletic receiver that you're just kind of going out there and throwing balls to.
Yep.
And he's not a refined player just yet, although he's a pretty decent route runner for his age. Imagine that.
Yes.
But I'm putting Carolina over Syracuse with all due respect. I'm sorry.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
not. They're
No
that,
argument.
but that's the argument, right? It's like who's going to be in there other than Carolina in that group, right?
Oh, I thought I was trying to replace BYU. No argument against North Carolina. No argument.
No, I don't. You can replace BYU all you want. Although I think BYU, once they get their full receiving core back to good health, they'll be there.
That's fair.
Having said that, the test was good for the defense, and they passed it outside of 4 plays. Mm-hmm. But there's still work to be done. Yes. Linebacker play, step in the right direction, Ryan, but we need to see even more improvement from that group. What do you think that unit needs to do? Number one, outside of stop getting ejected for targeting in the final 8 games of the year.
I mean, I think the one nice thing that you saw from last week's, Brian, is that you saw a couple different faces in the unit that I think it was a nice sign. But I mean, for me, the biggest thing that I took away, and I will give all credit to Al Golden on this one, is I thought that he really kind of zeroed in on what Maris Loifau does well. Like, I really thought that kind of using the versatility of him. I mean, he was playing him on the ball on some third downs. He was playing him kind of in space a little bit more. He was kind of just letting him read and react on the second level, letting him blitz A and B gaps. I think they really took advantage of the versatility that he brings from an alignment perspective, which I think was a great step. So I just need that to continue to use Maris Loifau the right way. You know, like, I think that you need to come to terms that, like, hey, he might not be the best read and react player of all time, but when I put him in a position where I just let him go, let him loose, he's a good football player in that role. So I think just accentuating the role, continue to expand upon it a little bit, and making Maris comfortable is a big step. Otherwise, I need the other inside linebacker to be a consistent, good football player against the run. Right now, I think that they're reading a little bit slow. And, you know, J.D. Bertrand will be out for the first half of the BYU game unless it's appealed or whatever that case might be. But he needs to, when he's in there, play more consistent football, be in the right spot, and attack. Like, that's the biggest thing. Because, I mean, Brian, again, this is hyperbolic of me. I know it is. But Prince Kali, for the number of plays that he was in there last game, was their best run-fill linebacker. And I think it was pretty substantially the best. I mean, if I'm being completely honest. So I'm at the point with the middle linebacker position, like, if you're not going to do it consistently, I'm going to put Prince Kali in there, man, and just tell him to attack downhill and go. And I'm going to put Junior Tuihalamaka in there and let him make mistakes. Like, that's where the point that I'm at with the linebacker unit. But for me, ask Maris to do what he does well. The middle linebacker unit needs to be consistent downhill players, and I need to find an answer at Rover. I need to find a guy that can make plays and could be a more efficient and consistent football player. Because Jack has not been great the last couple games, hasn't been really good all season. They need to find a way to make that a more productive position in their defense. The Rover spot needs to take a step up.
Ryan, there are going to be a lot of teams, whether he's playing Rover, Mike, or Will, that are going to watch the last few games of Jack Kaiser and say, we got to find ways to get pass game isolations on that guy. I'm shocked Carolina didn't go to it more, to be completely honest with you. And there was a couple times they wanted to, but they just didn't have time. You're going to see teams that have better offensive lines that are going to be able to give their quarterbacks a little bit more time. So I agree with you on that. Jack's either got to play better or they got to find someone else to do it, whether that's going with more of a true nickel more often and just having Tariq Bracy be a starter, as opposed to a rotation guy, having it be a Ramon Henderson when he gets back. Maybe it's a Xavier Watts type of guy. I think Xavier could do that role well in a nickel type against Clemson, especially against USC, where you're playing a team that's going to, spread you out more. Those are types of things that I think you need to really look at. And that's what is good about bye weeks, right? Like, okay, and here's why bye weeks are important. And we should have discussed at the beginning. The bye week is really the first time you can really take a long, hard look at yourself. You're always going to look at sort of your self-scouting after every game. But, by Sunday night after a Saturday game, and especially since Notre Dame plays decent number of night games. They've got a night game against Ohio State. They've got a night game coming up against BYU. They got a night game against Stanford, night game against Clemson. You're probably going to be a night game against USC. And if Notre Dame keeps winning, some of those other games that aren't at home could end up being night games too. You know how ABC and ESPN are with Notre Dame games. So within 24 hours of that game being over, you're sitting down as a staff getting ready to start working on your game plan for next week. That's just kind of how it is. You don't have a lot of time for self-scouting during the season. The way you can during a bye week, you can self-scout, but it's just different than the way you can where you can spend a couple days saying, hey guys, okay, here's what we're good at, here's what we're not good at. Is it the scheme? Do we need to change the formations that we're running it out of? Do we need to tinker our blocking scheme? Do we need to run it to the open side more than the closed side? Do we need to stop running this out of 12 and maybe spread them out a little bit more? Do we need to run it out of 12 more? Do we need to change our personnel? Is there a tell? Is our tackle lined up 6 inches back further when we run this play compared to that play, which good teams will figure out? I'm not saying that's what Notre Dame is doing. I'm just saying those are things you look for during a bye week because you have more time to spend on that stuff. And hopefully Notre Dame has done that on offense and defense, and hopefully it results in some personnel changes. There's a lot of positions where I think the personnel changes are just like we saw last week. Give Prince Colley a few more snaps. Play Junior Tuihalamaka more at middle linebacker. You know what I mean? And not just as an edge player. Just there's a lot of things you need to see done that they're like just little tinkering with the defense, right? But the one that I will look at and point to and say, you definitely got to figure something out there is Rover.
Yes.
Because it just has not been good. And you've already tinkered with Will, because Will was going into last game, I'd have said Will. But with how Prince played and then how they use Morrison, I was like, okay, if you can kind of use that, and then once Morrison gets comfortable in that role, then you can kind of add a little bit more to it, and add a little bit more to it, and add a little bit more to it, and then it'll be okay. So I think those are things that tinkering. I think Rover's the one that's got to really see some change. And I think at cornerback, it's Cam Hart's got to take this bye week to kind of get his head right. And I don't think Cam's head has been right the first month. And I think the hamstring really messed with him because I don't think he had confidence in himself to just play his game. Even against Ohio State, you saw him getting grabby. You saw him trying to bite on things against North Carolina that normally he wouldn't bite on, which got him beat on the first drive. There's just some things where, like, that's not the Cam Hart we're used to seeing, and I really think the hamstring was part of it. He looked healthier against Carolina. I think this is a week to kind of pull back on him a little bit, get his mind right, and get him back to playing like Cam Hart. That's a very important thing. Other than that, it's just clean up a couple things. Look, Clarence Lewis got smoked for no long touchdowns against North Carolina. Bad play. He's been pretty good up to this point in the year. Right? You don't just write him off because of one bad play. But you got to say, Clarence, you of all people can't make that mistake, right? Keep building on Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey in the role they're doing. Keep riding Tariq Bracy until this hot streak ends because he's been playing at a very high level. Got beat for that short touchdown on 4th down. Great play. Great throw and catch and route by Josh Downs. Got him, but you know what? Tariq got him pretty much the rest of the game. Yep. And so, you've got to – your secondary's played really well. Clean up some of the mistakes. Continue to focus on tackling better. That's where the secondary is. And then defensive line-wise, I mean, if your D-line can kind of play the rest of the year like it has the last 2 games, Ryan, this is kind of what we thought this defensive line was going to be. Now, neither team had a great offensive line. Now we need to see if they can do it against a better offensive line, and that's what the BYU test is going to tell us a lot. That's going to be a huge test because I would argue BYU has one of the top 3 offensive lines they're going to face, if not the best offensive line they're going to face. I think that's debatable, but it's definitely debatable, meaning they're definitely in that conversation of the best offensive lines are going to play. So if they can do that against that line, because this is your first chance at redemption as a D-line since Ohio State.
Yep. Well, and it's, I mean, for me, Brian, I think it's a litmus test for the defensive line, if we're being honest, because I mean, you went against an Ohio State offensive line that has talent, and they were playing at a high level that day, right? Like Paris Johnson had a good game, DeJuan Jones had a good game, Donovan Jackson had a pretty good game for the most part in his first career start in a guard. So you faced a lot of talent at Ohio State, and they were better. Justin Frye had done a much better job of getting that team prepared for game 1. But to your point, this is after a couple easier games as far as the offensive lines you were playing, you're now going against Blake Freeland at left tackle, who is a future NFL player, in my opinion, at left tackle, right? You have Clark Barrington, who's a really good college football player, will probably spend a little bit of time in the NFL. They have a right tackle that is a transfer from Oregon. So you have a bunch of talented dudes coming up here. And if Notre Dame can now take the momentum they've been building over the last couple of games and come out and have a dominant performance against the BYU offensive line, that tells me that the growth is real, right? Like, this isn't just a smoke and mirrors. You didn't play against two great offensive lines in a row. Like, this shows me now that, like, hey, this defensive line is as good as we thought they were. This is a big test. I would be willing to say, well, defensively for sure, that the defensive line is the team that I think you're going to get the best feel for how good they are after this game, because that is where the offensive line for BYU is going to be a good unit. So if they're able to do what they can do and what they have done over the last couple of games against a much better offensive line, that tells me that Al Washington and that unit have actually figured it out, and they are trending in that right direction. It's not just playing a bad offensive line anymore.
Big key. I thought Foskey and Adamiola have played pretty well in the last 2 games. They're key. Your dudes got to play like dudes. Riley Mills has continued to get better and better each week. He's been a very underrated. I've seen him get a lot of flack. Maybe it's just on the message board from some. Yeah. I don't understand why. I think Riley's played pretty well so far this year. I mean, he's doing what he's doing, what he needs to do. They're using him inside and outside. Ryan, you look like you wanted to comment on that. Before I move on to the other players, I'll let you kind of respond to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say with Riley, I think that it's a little bit of box score scouting sometimes, right? It's like, he has pressures, but he's not getting sacks. Last week he had the 2 sacks, so you're kind of like, oh, he's arrived. It's like, well, he's actually been playing pretty well. It's just he hasn't finished the first couple games, right? But
he got 2 tackles for loss against Carolina, but he had 2 already coming into the season. He's now tied with Isaiah Foskey for the lead on the team with 4 tackles for loss. I mean, he's on pace for 12 tackles for loss this year.
Yes.
And he hasn't – it's not like he's got a game with like 3 of them, right? I mean, he's had – 1.5 against Marshall, 2 against Carolina. He had at least 3 or 4 really good pressures against Ohio State. He was one of the guys that was primary culprit of flushing CJ Stroud out of the pocket. He's done some good things. Are there areas he's got to get better? Sure, as true with everybody. But Riley's had a good, solid year. He's got to continue to grow. I think it took Al Golden a while to figure out how to use Justin Adamiola. I think it took him until the 3rd game to figure out how to use Justin. And now I think he sees, so I don't need to worry about what this kid does in practice. I need to just get him out on the field on Saturday and find different ways to get him on the field. Okay, I get it now, right? And I'll tell you something else, Ryan. The last 2 games, the interior just as a whole of the Notre Dame defensive line has been brilliant. Chris Smith hardly makes any plays on the ball, like just him making a tackle, but he is such a force at nose when he's in the game because he just pushes guys around. And then you counter that with 275-pound Howard Cross, who's lightning quick off the ball. That's a really tough 1-2 punch. We're seeing more and more of Gabriel Rubio. We've now seen him 2 games in a row. Go ahead, Ryan, because he's done.
I was just going to say, I had this great clip that I got from the last game or whatever. I never posted it or anything, but it was literally you had not Howard Cross. You had Chris Smith at 3-tech and Gabriel Rubio as the nose in this situation. Right. And it was a run towards Chris Smith, and he pressed the offensive guard outside, made the running back have to bend back, and it ended up being him and Gabriel Rubio stopping the player for no gain. And I was like, that's an amazing rep, man, because you had 2 of the guys that we've been talking about as the depth piece that were both disruptive football players on a single play. So to your point, it was great to see Chris Smith doing a good, solid job. And Gabriel Rubio, you got a little flash of him last game, which is great to see as well.
Yes, and he played a little bit against Cal as well. So it's been good to see that. And what that does too, Ryan, is that combo right there gives them a chance against some of the teams that maybe are more run-oriented if they get to that point. That's a look you may want to use against Georgia if you have to play them at some point in time, or against when BYU tries to, run at you in certain situations, or other teams that may want to be more run-oriented. It gives you a chance to kind of have some beef up the middle with those 2 guys because they can both, make some plays. I thought Jacob Lacey was steady against Carolina, wasn't as productive. But again, there were very few inside reps where I was like, wow, that guy didn't do his job. Very few. There's a couple early, contain. But they settled down, did a better job of that. That's obviously something that's got to continue as well. They had that one drive against Drake May. After that, they pretty much shut down the contain. I thought at times they sacrificed the interior pass rush because of that, which I can live with if your ends are really hitting it hard, and they were against Carolina. I mean, that edge pocket was collapsing in a hurry. Even on plays where they weren't getting to him, they were blowing the tackles back into the backfield. So I thought that was good. I thought they were very disruptive. We saw Drake May come very close to multiple turnovers in this game. He did have the one. There was a couple times where I'll tell you something that Drake May did. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think you and I talked about this. There was at least 2 or 3 plays that I thought Drake May was about to throw a curl or an out. And he got to like here and he was like, oh, dude, that guy just jumped it. And he just drove it into the ground.
Yep.
Where I think if he tries to throw the route he was going to try to throw, it's probably get picked off. Like that's the kind of disruption and the kind of stickiness we saw at times in the back end of the defense that maybe you can't see on TV. Ryan, I ask you because you get a chance to watch the All-22. I was there. I also got a chance to watch the All-22. I think people that only watch on TV saw the 4 big plays, and they don't realize outside those 4 big plays, they were all over the North Carolina receivers in that game. And even the one big play that Jaden Mickey gave up, he was right in that dude's hip pocket. It was a great ball by Drake May, first of all, and Jaden mistimed his jump. It was also a great ball. And so the secondary needs to keep doing what they're doing, just clean up some of the little mistakes. Front 4, Foskey still has another level I think he can and needs to get to. I need to see him take over a game or 2 again moving forward. He did that multiple times last year. Only seen him do it really once so far. I will say this, though, about Foskey. He wasn't dominant against North Carolina the way he was last year. We'd have like 5-6 pressures and 2 sacks. But that was one of the most consistently good games that I've seen from Foskey in a long time. And you mentioned this to me afterwards too, Ryan, is he showed that for one of the few times in his career, and this is a good sign, he showed that he can dominate a game without having a bunch of pass rushes. Now, he had some pass rushes in this game. Don't get me wrong. Isaiah Foskey had some good pass rushes. But there was times in the last year where he'd have like 6 or 7 just brilliant pass rushes, and then that's kind of all he did. He was so good all around. This was one of his best all-around games, I thought, was against North Carolina this past week, coming off of what was also one of the best games of his career against Cal, which is a great sign for Foskey.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, Brian, like the thing that's been inconsistent with Isaiah, even like going back to last year, was sometimes he's got really powerful hands, but it's not always like super active hands, kind of getting in and working and getting off blocks. And this game against North Carolina, I mean, there was a couple clips that I think I posted them on the board where like he is pressing at the point of attack, engaging, getting off of blocks, working against pulling guards, and keep staying square. I thought it was a really good technical game from him, especially in the run game. I thought he did a tremendous job in that department. So I agree completely with you. And the cornerback, or I should just say the secondary play in general, I thought the secondary was sticky against North Carolina. Like I thought they were in really good position. I thought that they were playing good coverage. Again, there was 2 really bad coverage busts in the game, like 2 really bad where I'm just kind of like, it was so bad. I'm just kind of like, I don't know what he was thinking, actually. Like, I don't know. Right. I like on that one with Cam Hart, like I truly do not know what his process was during that play. Like I can't tell you. I don't know. I've speculated a couple different things. I don't truly know. But to that point, for the most part, they're playing well. They playing well. Yeah. I mean, Drake May, I came out of that game and I would say this. I think Drake May's the real deal. I think he's going to be the real deal.
Oh, yeah.
I think he did have moments where he was kind of second guess his reads because windows were closing a lot faster than they probably had been the first 3
He hadn't seen that. And this is what we said going into the game. They hadn't seen a defense. He hadn't seen a defense with this kind of speed before, where guys were open coming out of their breaks, he thought. And then by the time he got to here, it's like, that guy ain't open anymore. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, my goodness. So that was a positive sign. Here's a question for you, Ryan.
Yep.
Who has been Notre Dame's best cover player in the secondary through the first 4 games in totality? Who's been their best cover player through the first 4 games?
It's Tariq Bracy. I don't even, is there anybody even I mean,
nope, not even close. Who's
I don't
number
even think
2?
anybody's close. I was thinking
not even
number
close.
2.
Who's number 2? Because I'm setting you up for this one. Who's number 2 in your opinion? Who's been their
Probably
best
say
consistently?
Morrison.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo. He's been so good.
Yeah,
he's been
outside
really
of that
good.
one bust. Outside of that one bust from Clarence Lewis this past game, though, I think Lewis is close, but I would say it's probably Morrison on snap basis.
Here's the difference. They're not asking Clarence to play a lot of man.
True.
They're letting him play off, and that's a credit to Al Gold and Mike Mickens for finding what Clarence Lewis is comfortable with and letting him go play. But as far as just coming up playing man, Benjamin Morrison's been really good. Which is why he's now starting over Clarence Lewis.
Yeah, no, it's been great to see
Clarence has been
Benjamin
much
Morrison.
By the way.
Yeah, going back to Tariq Bracy, Brian. Again, like I just want to take for what we've seen so far through 4 weeks. I just want to take this opportunity as much as I can to say good for that kid, man. He has battled a lot of adversity during his career. And I mean, I don't think this is hyperbolic to say like he might be a draftable nickel right now on the next level with how he's played this season so far. So just really happy for that kid fighting through adversity.
Yeah. We know he's going to test well. The problem he's going to have some really good film to show people. Going all the way back to like 2018 against Florida State and Pitt and then 2019 against Georgia. There's going to be some games, some really good film. There's also going to be some pretty bad film for him too. What he's showing this year is he can consistently play and run. Now he's got to continue that, and he's going to really get tested in the second half of the year. BYU's got some really savvy kids. Clemson's going to throw some bigger kids at him. USC is going to have some great receivers throw at him. He's going to get stuck in some matchups against Zay Flowers. I mean, he's going to get tested in the final 8 games of the year, but he's also been tested so far this year. I mean, first 4 games, he's been tested pretty good. And he's certainly held up for that. But Benjamin Morrison has been a pleasant surprise from someone who graded him as a top 100 recruit. I thought this is what we would get from Benjamin Morrison next year.
Yeah.
Like what we're seeing this right now is what I thought he would be next year. And so that's been a pleasant surprise. It also says a lot about what this defense could be. That in the conversation you and I just had, because I wanted to see – this is why I wanted to kind of keep going down the list with you. You didn't even think twice about saying Cam Hart.
No.
Because he has been, in my opinion, at best, their third corner so far. Now, again, we think we know why. I really think the hamstring got in his head. But what I'm saying is this is not being said as an insult to Cam Hart. This is actually a good thing. This is where you need to be as a football team. This is the kind of coach you need coaching your corners, where your best player, and Cam Hart is still their best corner, your best corner has been arguably your third or fourth best corner in actual play, and you're still really good. Cam Hart's eventually going to figure it out. He's too good. He cares too much. He works too hard not to figure it out. He's going to figure it out. Yep. Now it's like, but now Tariq and Benjamin and Clarence have all stepped up. And now when Cam figures it out, now all of a sudden your secondary is going to be really good. And that's an encouraging thing. And I hope that Mike Mickens has had that conversation with Cam during this bye week. Hey, look, man, stop trying to go prove to everyone you're an All-American on every single play. Just do your job, right? Mm-hmm. Just do your job. Be the guy I know you can be, because these other dudes are stepping it up around you. If we can get you playing to where we think you can be, boy, this secondary becomes a really good deal. I also thought we saw the first glimpses of what Xavier Watts can be as a safety as well. He had the one play, I agree with you on the touchdown was it touchdown to Clarence Lewis, or was it the long throw to Jay? One of those two, he took a 2-level of an angle. He didn't get over top.
Yeah, it was the one against Clarence. Clarence kind of let him loose on cover 2, and then it was just a really steep angle from Xavier Watts coming over.
Other than that, we saw some really good things from him. Again, he's got to clean up some stuff. His angles aren't always the best coming down to the football or in coverage, but we started to see how he plays at a different gear than the other safeties. Just from an explosiveness standpoint, a speed standpoint, I'd still play him a receiver. I think it's a missed opportunity not to put him a receiver, but it is what it is. It's not going to happen. So we're not going to keep talking about something that's just not going to happen. So I think getting him, Houston Griffith has been steady. DJ Brown's been steady. He had a couple plays I really thought he should have done better against North Carolina, but overall he's been steady. And Brandon Joseph has been good, right? He hasn't been great since the opener, but he's been good. Secondary is playing at a high level. The D-line can keep building on what it's been to. I'll say this, clean up 4 plays against North Carolina, and this is what the defense is capable of being. Would you agree with that, Ryan? Like, that's what this defense should be. And 100%. So third down defense is got to get better. But a big part of it was better against North Carolina. It still needs to get better. And a big part of that's going to have to be continue to get better in the run game and containing the quarterbacks. They finally had a good run game, a really good run defense performance against North Carolina. That was a great sign, because I want to context is important, right, Ryan? And I want to put some context into this North Carolina game. North Carolina rushed for 66 yards on Saturday against Notre Dame. They ran for 183, 215, and 314 in the previous 3 games, but those teams are not that good. Last year against Georgia Tech, they ran for 63. In 2020, they didn't have a single performance lower. In 2019, their lowest that year was 97. What Notre Dame did to North Carolina on Saturday was the second worst rushing performance in 4 years under Phil Longo. So some context, right? Yep. And so that was a really, really good performance. So first time they haven't rushed for a touchdown in the game also since the season opener against Virginia Tech last year when they only scored 10 points. So we saw some steps in the right direction. Now they got to continue to build on that because being good against the run is priority number one for Notre Dame in the second half of the year. BYU will try to run on them. Clemson will try to run on them. Syracuse will definitely try to run on them. USC will try to run on them if you don't respect it. USC is more willing to use the run now than they have in the past under the previous head coach. So run defense is the other big part of that too that has to continue to get better and better and better. North Carolina was a big step in the right direction. We're really the last two games outside of quarterback scrambles. You've shut down the run game completely the last two games. Running backs have done nothing against Notre Dame the last 2 weeks outside of one run by the Cal kid 2 weeks ago. They've really done almost nothing. And it
wasn't even, it's not even their best kid. I mean, like you said, Jay Knott just ran for 270 something yards this past week. And the previous week against Notre Dame, he ran for 33 or something like that. Like he had 33 yards rushing. So Notre Dame's kind of been building because, I mean, honestly, Brian, do you want to talk about a gut check moment against Marshall? Marshall was just a more physical football team than they were from their offensive line perspective to Notre Dame's defensive line and linebackers. The kid LeBourne ran for 160 yards against Notre Dame. It was that. I want to talk about a gut check and a reality check. That's the game, man. But so the last 2 weeks, give Notre Dame a little bit of credit, right? They didn't pack it in and just say wow, we stink, man. What are we going to do next, right? They were kind of okay, we need to fix this. We're going to stop a dynamic freshman in Jay Knott and limit him, right? They need to do better against scrambling quarterbacks. There's no doubt. But, I mean, they have been averaging a really nice total, North Carolina, per carry from the running backs the first few games. We agree that we didn't think that they were the greatest players. I think they're good players. So the Hampton kid, the Petaway good, they're good football players.
Well, they shut down the running backs. Another kid back that game too that they didn't have the two previous games. And they had Josh Downs for the first time since the opener, which factored into just another weapon you had to think about in the run game. So yes, you're correct.
And I like that this kind of combines 2 points that we've talked about a little bit, right? It's defensive line, keep ascending. You're heading in the right direction. I think we've seen that the last 2 weeks. I think you definitely saw it against North Carolina. And that goes not even just pass game production, right? That's, doing the little things, taking on double teams, locking out the point of attack, getting off blocks, all those good things. And then the linebacker play, I think, has been better, right? At least it was last game. It was definitely better than the first three. The first three, Notre Dame's linebackers were a major issue, absolute major issue. I can't believe that they stopped the run as well against Cal as they did based upon how their linebackers played that game. I just did not think they played well, but it was a step in the right direction. So the first and second level of your defense is getting better, and you'll need them to be better because, like you said, if BYU is able to just run the football down your throat, they will. When Clemson comes, when you have to play against Clemson at home, Will Shipley and Kobe Pace and those dudes, you're going to run the football. There's no doubt. So the better teams on your schedule coming up are teams that want to run the football. So I think, again, headed in the right direction, but now you need to prove it against a better offensive line this week, against a better running games moving forward. I think it's a massive step for Notre Dame, but they need to continue to exponentially improve every week.
Because you talked about Jay Knott, Ryan, and just a little context for Jay Knott. In the 3 games not against Notre Dame, he had 17 carries for 104 yards, 6.1 per carry, 7 carries for 52 yards, 7.4 per carry, and also in that game had a touchdown catch in that game. And then the other game, he's coming off against Arizona, as you mentioned, 19 carries for 274 yards and 3 touchdowns. I didn't know that freshmen were allowed to touch the ball that much in a game. I'm still a little surprised by that. I thought that was against the rules. The freshmen weren't allowed to be offered. Jay Knott apparently can play as a freshman, but Tobias Merriweather cannot. But anyway, it's a different comment for a different day. Then against Notre Dame, 13 carries for 33 yards, 2.5 per carry. Now, that's because Cal has a bad offensive line, and this is your point.
Yes.
They're going to play some teams that maybe don't have a Jay Knott at running back, but have good running backs, but have much better lines. The combination of the Syracuse line and Sean Tucker with a running quarterback that can run like Garrett Schrader, is a scary thing for what we've seen based on what we've seen from Notre Dame defense leading into the North Carolina game. So right now, the North Carolina game needs to be the launching point for the defense when it comes to the run defense, not an anomaly. And as long as that's true, then this defense is going to be even better coming out of the break. And I think the defense could actually benefit more if by just doing what you've been doing, then the offense needs to tinker stuff still. But I think the defense is like, look, you're learning a new coordinator, you're learning new schemes, just focus on your base stuff this week and keep getting better at that. Because when you're on, you're really good. It's just the inconsistency. So, Ryan, we're going to have a mailbag coming up, a real brief mailbag here because we do have some super chats, some other things to get to. But that's going to do it for our breakdown of Notre Dame. We will be back tomorrow. Sean Davis and I will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the Countdown to Kickoff show. So 10 a.m. to noon. Sean and I are going to kind of talk about, we're going to have some fun with Notre Dame and the break and kind of predict some breakout players and make some predictions for Notre Dame coming out of the break. And then he and I are going to preview some of the big games for the week. So normally Ryan and I would do that. We're just going to kind of hold off on that till tomorrow. That's on me. Ryan was going to do that with me, but because the show started a lot later, we were not able to get that today. So I do apologize for that. But we are going to discuss all that tomorrow. And then, of course, Monday we'll be back on track. And so before we get to the mailbag, obviously, everybody hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review, and obviously continue listening to the Irish Breakdown podcast. So, Ryan, it's been a minute since I've said this to you. It's mailbag time. We're going to get to a mailbag here, and we're going to get to a few of these, and I just want to kind of begin with a little bit of the comments from the beginning. And Salty Virginia Peanuts was one of several people that said, happy Friday, IB Nation. Blessings to Brian and Angela. Keep on rocking, Rita. And then Anthony Solomon also glad that they're having a show today. I'm also glad that Brian and Angela are feeling better. So I won't dive too much into this on this particular show, but I put a very long message board post on the board last night. Just a little update on our dog, Rita. So Saturday during the post-game show, I got a frantic text from my wife who'd been trying to call me saying, you need to call me now. She was at the vet with Rita. They found 2 masses in her body, and her body was like kind of killing itself on the inside. Her blood was not – her immune system was attacking her blood cells and all these type of different things, which combined with the 2 masses they found – had them thinking that she had cancer. And the vet, actually, I listened to the video last night, Ryan, or I listened to the audio because Angela recorded the audio so that way we could kind of look back and she could let me hear it. And the lady suggested that we euthanize Rita that night. And so Angela's like, we're not doing that until Brian gets home. So I had to change my plans around. I flew home Sunday. And then we took Rita to our vet on Monday. That was an emergency vet. And they were very caring and nice. So there was no complaints because, I mean, they were just doing what the science told them to do. Our vet saw the same masses on her insides, and her body had gone into full-fledged anemia at that point in time. So they said the only chance you have is to get her down to Purdue, the veterinary hospital at Purdue. So we did that, and they said by Friday, if you don't do something now, by Friday she may not be here. And so they thought it was cancer. We took her to the emergency vet at Purdue. That night they admitted her in the hospital. They said she's got anemia. And they saw the 2 masses. They looked at the charts and they said, this looks like cancer. And then when you combine the anemia with it, I guess that's something that goes with it. And so we prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And Monday she went into the vet, or she went in to get a CT scan at Purdue, which is a much more intensive scan. And the big mass that was in her stomach was gone, completely gone. And they still to this day, Ryan, have not been able to identify why she went from fine on Wednesday to anemic on Saturday. And now she's home and doing much better and she's got her energy back. So I believe it was a miracle and a blessing, and I believe that God has worked in our lives. I've said to y'all a bunch of times in the show, I believe in the power of prayer, and I think we saw that this week. But also, Ryan, I really am thankful for the community that we have. We had so many people reaching out saying they were thinking of us and praying for us. And just love so much of what this community is. And I was the one that benefited from it this time. And I can't tell you how much it meant to me to have so many people that just care about you. Like people that have never actually physically met in person that just care about each other and love each other and support each other in not just talking football, but in other stuff. And I can't tell you how much that means to me, everybody, so much. And Ryan, thank you for stepping up this week and allowing me to kind of focus on my family while while you kind of ran stuff. So appreciate all that, everybody. But that's the latest. She's upstairs resting right now, but she's got her energy back and her blood levels were back up to normal. She went from anemic 2 days ago to normal blood levels today. And the vet said, we don't know. We have no clue what happened here. So I was like, I know, but we don't need to get into that right now. So anyway, so that's the latest with our family. And again, appreciate all of you so very much. But Ryan, this is still a football show. And so we're going to get in some mailbag questions about football. And the first one here from Quinn Kibler, he says, mailbag, what did you think? What did you think of Wake Forest slow turtle mesh against Clemson? Surprised it worked that well. Quinn, that's what they've always done. They have done that for years. The reason it didn't, and you and I talked about this game last week, Ryan. Yeah. And we didn't think Wake could score against Clemson because the way that Brent Venables had attacked that mesh for years just blew it up. But what we said was we don't know how Wes Goodwin is going to be. Apparently, Wes Goodwin did not watch film of the way Brent Venables attacked that because that was a terrible defensive game plan by Clemson. They allowed that mesh to happen, and they allowed Wake Forest to do to them what they do to everybody else, where Venables just attacked it and made you declare early. The thing you and I talked about in the summer, Ryan, very good front seven, questionable secondary. That questionable secondary got exposed big time against Wake because unlike the Georgia Tech game where guys were getting open, but Jeff Sims was missing him or he wasn't getting time to throw, Wake Forest did a pretty decent job of giving Sam Hartman enough times for him to make some big plays in the pass game, and they started to run on Clemson in the second half. So I didn't understand Wes Goodwin's game plan, to be completely honest with you. And that's, to me, it was more about that than anything else, in my opinion.
It was a bizarre game, Brian, because like you said, I mean, Wake Forest only had like 4 yards rushing at halftime. And then the second half, man, it was just like Clemson was just getting worn down. And to your point, I feel, and this is without watching the coaches film, like, so this is not a super educated opinion, but it almost felt like Clemson was like, oh man, in the second half, like they're running the football on us. We need to kind of use extra players into the box to stop this thing. And then they're leaving their corners kind of one-on-one against guys like A.T. Perry, and I forget what number 80's name is in that game that had a huge game. He had like 140-something yards and a couple touchdowns in that game. But they were just leaving these guys one-on-one. And right now, at least at this point in the season, Clemson's corners look a little bit like a weakness to this secondary, right? Or to this team right now. Like it's – I can't remember these corners being this bad, Brian. I mean, like they've always had a guy, right? Like an A.J. Terrell, a Darian Kendrick, Andrew Booth. Like they've always had a guy – where you're like, okay, that guy's a future NFLer. Like, he's a good football player, you know? Like, right now, I don't know who they have. I mean, I know they have a couple of young guys that are starting to get a little bit of playing time, but, like, they just don't have a guy right now. It's a little troubling for Clemson. I guess I'll give them a little golf clap on the other side of things. At least the offense stepped up in this game, and TJ had a good game. GJ
he did.
They had one of his best games. So
Wake's defense stinks.
Yes,
Wake's defense stinks.
It's so bad.
Stinks.
It's really bad. To Quinn's question, Quinn, Wake Forest has always been one of my least favorite teams to scout because I hate the elongated mesh. I hate it so much. It's so stupid. Because as a former linebacker, I'm like, to your point about Venables, why would I just blitz and attack this thing and just destroy it at the point of its destroy it at the point of mesh? Like, just kill it, right? But for whatever reason, second half, they were wearing them down. So good for Wake Forest, man. They played really tough in that football game. They did me wrong. They played really tough.
And their reward, Ryan, after that is now the old Demon Deacons have to go on the road and play Florida State, who's 4-0. So
it's gonna be a tough
I'm
one,
very
man.
curious how they're going to bounce back. But, you know, it's interesting, like you said, they did all that with A.T. Perry having 4 catches for 51 yards. That's it. I mean, that's a decent game. 4 catches, 51 yards, and a touchdown. It's not a bad game. But for A.T. Perry, it's not a very good game. But Jamal Banks is the guy you're talking about. Yes. And the other guy, too, that had a couple big plays is Donovan Green, who I brought up last week. He was kind of a basketball player. But he only had 2 catches, but they went for 53 yards, and they were both touchdowns. Like, they were just ripping them down the field, man. I mean, they're just ripping them down the field. And there was nothing I felt like Clemson made very few adjustments, and the little adjustments I did see in the second half were like, why would that be your adjustment? Like, you just made it easier on them to run on you. And they're still hitting down. You haven't stopped the down the field shots, but you made it easier on them to run. It's a very puzzling game plan. And honestly, you and I discussed this. I don't think we discussed on the show, but, you know, Clemson has improved this year, but their success is a little to me, has not been they haven't been as dominant as it may look. Like the 41-10 against Georgia Tech, that was like 14-10 game in the third quarter. Like Georgia Tech had multiple chances to make that a tie game in the second half. They poured it on in the fourth quarter of that game. That was not a typical 41-21 football game. You know what I mean, Ryan? And same, like they beat Furman like 35-12. Their game against Louisiana Tech was very close at halftime, and they poured it on in the second half. They scored 27 points in the second half against Georgia Tech. And then, 14-3 at halftime. Georgia Tech that was more about just how bad Georgia Tech is as a team. I mean, guys just dropping balls, and they were scheming Clemson. There were guys open against Clemson for Georgia Tech. Mm-hmm. They weren't able to make the plays on the ball. Louisiana Tech game was similar. It was 13-6 at halftime. They scored 21 in the third quarter, and kudos to them. But they had two 32-yard touchdown drives in the second half. Right, that was their defense put them in some good positions. So anyway, to me, Ryan, they're beatable. But this year's team has learned how to win tough games. The thing that hurt Clemson in the past, they hardly ever played competitive games in the season, again, in conference. And so last year, I don't think they handled that real well. This year, they're doing it. They are not playing pretty, but still winning. Because last year's team last year's team for Clemson would have lost Saturday to Wake Forest. No doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. So that is a positive to see if you're looking at it from a Clemson standpoint. You have a super chat from. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that Williams kid from Clemson's a player, by the way, the slot receiver number 0. He's
talking about who are you talking about?
The freshman,
Antonio Williams, the kid who's a true freshman.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I didn't know.
Clemson passed the waiver where they're allowed to play freshmen.
Oh, gotcha. That's my bad.
Notre Dame forgot to do that before the season.
That's my bad. So. They didn't get that waiver done in time. Got it.
Nah,
got
or
it.
wasn't passed. One or the other.
Good to know. Yeah, that's great. You're able to use freshman receivers. Who knew? Sorry for the sarcasm. It's been a long week. Gregory Gilbert with a super chat. Thank you, Gregory. If the system is that complicated, then they need to change it. Sick of seeing big-time programs playing young kids. Tell me something has to change at Notre Dame. And especially since Notre Dame kids are smart. We always hear that, how smart Notre Dame kids are, and I believe that to be true. But it's kind of like, well, your level of smartness based on what? If you're asking a really smart freshman to handle a senior calculus class, he's going to look like a kid who's not ready for that. Whereas at Bama, at Clemson, at Georgia, at Ohio State, they don't ask their freshmen to know advanced calculus. Say, let's put you in a freshman class, and then we'll use your talent in that regard. And Notre Dame just refuses to do that. And yes, Gregory, it needs to change. It's needed to change for a while. You could use an exception here that, okay, Jordan Johnson wasn't focused off the field. Okay, fine. Take him out. Then let's keep talking about, why did Will Fuller only catch 6 passes as a freshman? Why did Kevin Austin only catch 5? Why did Braden Lindsey hardly play at all as a freshman? We could do this all flipping day. Why did you need 2 guys to get injured last year before you finally started making Lorenzo Styles a more focal point of your offense, right? We saw Logan Diggs last year. Well, he's not ready. He didn't play a single snap until the Virginia Tech game, and all of a sudden looked like a guy that knew how to play against Virginia Tech. Who knew? Yep. You're going to tell me that the light just went on that Wednesday? Or would he not have played if Chris Tyree wasn't hurt, and we never would have known that he was already ready to play? And so,
and Brian, I know that Notre Dame had a really good running back, obviously, in Kyron Williams. So, I'm not saying it should have been like a running back by approach type of committee, but sure. the three trio of backs that we're so excited about this year, they were all on the team last year, right? I know that Chris Tyree was dealing with, being banged up and all that good stuff, but what did estimate have on the season? Like 7 carries?
And they all came in like 2 games late in the year in November. Yeah.
Right.
Diggs didn't. Here's my point, Ryan. I'm not even saying you need to take a ton of carries away from Kyron Williams. And also, he didn't play a snap, Ryan. Not a snap. Audric Estime, I don't think, played a snap other than like some lead blocking things in a couple games all season until late. And that's the frustration. I'm not saying Tobias Merriweather needs to be the focal point of their offense. We're not saying that, right? But there's definitely a happy medium between doing nothing and asking him to be, Michael Floyd as a freshman, right? I'm not asking him to be that. So it's just, again, it's a coaching problem, not a player problem. Michael S., can you explain what the quarterback rating number is? So essentially, it's a formula that takes into account attempts, completions, yards per attempt, touchdowns, and interceptions. And there's certain numbers that you add, some add for count, you divide them by certain things, and then it spits out the number. It's a number that is very, Ryan, it puts a lot of emphasis on efficiency. So,
Yes.
Teams that maybe don't throw for a ton of yards, but complete a lot of passes are going to have a higher quarterback rating. Now, and that's why CJ Stroud's number last year was so absurd, because he was not only a guy that threw for a lot of yards, but also threw for a lot of yards per attempt.
Yes.
And so it's definitely something that values that, and it doesn't love turnovers. But look, the guy that led the nation in quarterback rating last year, finished sixth in the nation in quarterback rating last year, led the nation in yards per game, was Bailey Zappi, and he had 11 interceptions. Stetson Bennett finished fourth in quarterback rating last year. He threw 7 interceptions, but it's like 3, 6, 3, 7, 4. So high yards per. And here's the other thing: if you look at the top 10 in quarterback rating last year, here's their yards per attempt. Starting from 10, going up 9-1, 8-7, 9-7, 8-9, 8-7, 9-1, 10, 9-7, 10-1, 11-9. To me, the greatest efficiency number that you can have as a quarterback is your yards per attempt, more so than yards per completion. And then I also like seeing a quarterback who has a smaller gap between yards per attempt. Like, you don't want a guy that's like 8.5 yards per attempt and 17 yards per completion, because that tells me you're just hitting a bunch of big plays, but you're inefficient. I want the guy that's like 9 and 14. That's that tells me a lot about the explosiveness and efficiency of your offense, right? But that's my best way to answer that question. So you want to make a run at it?
Brian, I was just going to say that quick mention of Western Kentucky, man. They are a fun offense to watch, by the way.
Yeah.
Quick tangent, because I don't know if you saw it, but they had a Division II champion quarterback, Austin Reed. He played at West Florida, transfer over to Western Kentucky, and they look exactly the same as they did last year. Wasn't
the kid they had last year a Division II transfer?
Zappi was an FCS kid. So
FCS,
close.
okay.
I'm talking about like Division II.
Where was he?
He went from Division II up to Group of 5, which is
where was Zappi from?
Zappi was from Houston Baptist.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah, yep. D2 yes, West Florida to, I don't care what
Western
level
Kentucky.
of FBS you're playing, is a big jump.
It's
a big
crazy
jump. And as we've seen, Ryan, the Sun Belt's a pretty good conference this year.
Yeah, for this year they're playing fantastic. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it is a fun offense to scout. Brian, New York, Georgia doubted Stetson Bennett. Why can't Drew Pine be our Stetson Bennett? Well, first of all, Stetson Bennett's like 3 years in the program longer than Drew Pine is right now. Number one. Number two, I mean, I'm trying to think of the right way to answer this. I think right now Stetson Bennett is older, stronger, more experienced than Drew Pine. It took Stetson Bennett till his 5th year to look like a competent college quarterback.
Yes.
I mean, Stetson Bennett before last year was not very good. I mean, he just wasn't. And he has really good players around him. I mean, that helps too. And I'll tell you what Todd Monk is doing. He's doing a great job of scheming that offense up this year.
Sure is.
Great job of scheming up. They didn't look great against Kent State. I'll say that. But for up until last week's game, they were scheming up the heck out of some people. Now, they haven't really been tested by a good defense yet. I don't think Oregon has a good defense. But so the tests are going to ramp up a little bit here moving forward. But yeah, he's smart. He knows where to go with football. He's gutsy. He plays with a lot of Stetson Bennett is in his head way better than he actually is physically.
Yes.
And that's very important. I'm not saying that as an insult or to make fun of him. I'm saying that as a compliment, because you can't have the success that he's had if you have a realistic expectation, if you have a realistic evaluation of yourself. If Stetson Bennett knew his talent level the way that you and I know his talent level, he does not play with the guts and the confidence and the take the chances that he takes against Bama and Cincinnati and teams that he plays. He just doesn't, Ryan. He thinks he's way better than he is. And Drew Pine has some of that in him too. We saw it last year. We did not see it in the spring. We did not see it against Marshall, and we did not see it much against Cal. We finally saw it against Carolina. Now let's see Drew do that against a defense that's not terrible, right? But there are some similarities there, Ryan. I would say that. I would say Stetson has a little bit better deep ball arm right now than Drew Pine, but that's also because he's like 4 years older than Drew Pine, like in age. I mean, I'm serious. He's like 25 years old.
Yeah.
I think Drew's like 20 right now, like 20, almost 21. So, yeah, Drew Pine will throw a better deep ball in 4 years when he'll be on Stetson Bennett's age. So, yeah, it helps.
Oh, man. You know how I'm really funny on Twitter?
Sure. Yeah, let's go with that.
I made a tweet about Stetson Bennett a couple weeks ago. You know, like when you're in college and you have to do a group project with a bunch of random people that you've never talked to in the class. Mm-hmm. And then the one person does all the work and then everyone gets the same grade. Stetson Bennett's one of the people that didn't do that much of the project, but got a really good grade because, hey, what's the biggest difference? Georgia has a lot of talent around him, man. Like he doesn't really get touched in that pocket, man. They've done a good job developing offensive line. They have really good running backs. They have great tight end room. They've done a great job assembling a good team around him where Stetson knows who he is. And
he does his job.
Brian, like he is comfortable in his own skin and he doesn't make a ton of mistakes because he knows what is expected of him. So that's why he is what he is right now.
It helps you not be afraid to make mistakes when you know you have an elite defense on the other side of the ball.
Yes.
It does.
Yes.
It does. Now, some of the hype about him through the first 3 games was just annoying because it's like, guys, he's throwing to wide open receivers. He's playing bad defenses. Like he ripped up Samford and South Carolina, who are not good. So can we like pump the brakes a little bit on like the Heisman talk and some of this other kind of stuff? Like, let's just chill out a little bit on some of this stuff, guys. Okay, let's go and do that. Anthony Solomon, a super chat. Thank you very much for this, buddy. A little something for Ms. Rita. I appreciate you very, 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 very much. Another super chat from Tyler Evans. I want to wish Jason Evans a happy 50th birthday. He is my hero, role model, and best friend, and my dad. I love you, and go Irish. So Jason Evans, my man, I hope you're also a Notre Dame fan like your son. That would mean that you did some really good parenting by developing your son into a Notre Dame fan. But Jason Evans, buddy, thank you very, very much. Happy 50th birthday to you. And we want to thank your son, Tyler, for being a part of our Irish Breakdown community. It definitely means a lot to us. So thank you for that, Tyler. Tyler Smith, this is Tyler Day. Tyler Smith says, when is Donovan Hinish going to get some reps? The next, hopefully a couple blowouts. I think the plan has always been for Donovan to be a redshirt guy, which I think they would have liked to have done with Kurt if they were able to. The only reason Kurt played in 2017 is because Kurt's just got that mindset of he's just not going to take a red shirt, but their depth at defensive tackle was terrible. And fortunately for him, COVID hit, which allowed him to get his 5th year, because I think Kurt is more ready now to make an NFL roster, which he did, than he would have been coming out in 2021 or 2020 after 2020. I think the extra year in the weight room for a guy like Kurt Hinish helps a lot, and I think it'll help Donovan as well. I think we'll see him, Ryan. I mean, the sad thing is the one game that should have been a blowout for Notre Dame wasn't, and so you couldn't get some of those young guys snaps. And then now, hopefully against UNLV and some of these games moving forward, Navy, you'll have a couple of these games where you can really blow a team out and get guys like that some snaps. But it'll be late game, get some young guys some reps, and I don't think you'll see him play more than 4 snaps, nor should he. They need to put some distance between Donovan and the older kids, number 1, and number 2. Donovan needs time. He's an undersized, quick, athletic, undersized guy that needs a year in the weight room. You do not want to burn a year of eligibility for Donovan Hinish. If he's going to have a chance to help Notre Dame, it's going to be more so in years 3 to 5 than years 1 and 2. Right. And so that's where it is for Donovan. So I don't think we'll see a ton of him this year other than mop up minutes. Ryan, do you agree or disagree with that?
No, I agree completely. I think that you want to get him a little bit of game action, but I'll also reserve that red shirt. And we talked about it, Brian, right? The interior defensive line has been playing good ball, man. So I don't think there's there's not a massive need to start getting him reps, right? Like you could be patient with him.
Right. And that's good for him. That patience is very good for him, to your point. Agree completely. Jacob Steele says, Ryan, I noticed Marcus Freeman said the guys needed practice during the bye week and no time off, but is that something that Brian Kelly used to do, or did he give guys off? By the way, I prefer the Marcus Freeman approach, just asking. I'm a big fan of staying and practicing during a bye week except when it's maybe a midterm week or it's spring break or winter break. Let guys go home for a few days. If it's middle to later in the year, Ryan, when it is a bye week in September, that is not the time, especially when you're 0-2. That is not the time for me to be focusing on giving guys days off. Now, pull back from the bang, pull back maybe from the number of reps, maybe do a couple, uppers practices where maybe you're not putting the same pounding on them. But this is a team in all phases that needs to work. I think they definitely need to work.
I mean, in Brian, like you have good things, you have things trending in the right direction, right? So like, I don't want to kill momentum.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want these guys to keep staying in that groove, and let's really start to accentuate the things that we're doing well and keep it moving, man. Absolutely.
Plus Drew Pine being thrust in the lineup. He's only played 2 games starter. He needs the work. He needs the timing, all of that. Maybe pull back the reins a little bit on the volume, Ryan, but yes, they need to work this week. And I agree with you. Later in the year, maybe different, a more veteran team, maybe, but this team needs it.
Yes.
Tyler Evans with another super chat. Thank you, Tyler. With USC and UCLA coming to the Big Ten, how would you reshape the divisions? I would go. So well, at that point in time, we'll have 16 teams, Ryan?
Yeah, sounds right. Yep.
I would 16 teams. I'd probably go pods and go 4 and 4.
Yeah.
And then just have Europe. So I'd have UCLA, USC. I mean, take the most West teams you can get, maybe throw Nebraska in there or something, and go that way. And then have Michigan's Ohio State, Michigan State, and I don't know, pick a long time, just try to mix it up that way. Yeah. But honestly, right now, Tyler, the reason that I'm not gonna, I think it's different is I think they're still trying to build. I think they want at least 2 to 4 more teams in the Big Ten. So I think you're going to wait to see them kind of fill out. I think they want to get to 20. And if they get to 20, the pods make even more sense right now. I think 16, there might even be enough for, honestly, at 16, it's almost at a bad place for divisions, but it's also too small for pods. I'd almost go divisionless at that point in time and just have kind of like the ACC season. You have your 3 teams that you play every year, and you have a couple, this, and then just mix it up a little bit. I think that at 16, it's too big for divisions at 16 because you're going to play 1 or 2 games against the other division. It's it's silly. I just go divisionless at that point in time. I'm not really a big fan of divisionless football when it's bigger, but sometimes you get too big for divisions, and I think 16 is that cutoff for me.
It's going to get messy, man. It is going to get messy. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this whole thing rounds out because, I mean, to your point, Brian, I think 20 is the number. I agree. I think that's where they want to get to. It's just, man, there's a lot to figure out when that happens,
Yes.
It's just,
yes.
It's giving me a headache just thinking about it, man. I feel like I'm watching the Bengals game again last night with those terrible white uniforms that were just giving me a headache.
Yes. They were brutal. And then there's people giving you a hard time.
People fought back so hard. I'm just guys,
what are you looking at? It's ridiculous. We are not Marshall. Great comment. I'm ready for the day that we have a podcast. We don't have to complain about the lack of use of device. Hey, you and me both. Right? You and me both. I don't enjoy it. Michael Borth said, Brian, please calm down the masses. BYU's exposed by Utah State last night. BYU is a poor man's Carolina. We will throat punch them. Notre Dame may very well throat punch BYU, but with all due respect, BYU is a better football team than North Carolina. Look, BYU did not play well last night and still won by double digits over Utah State. Now, Utah State's not a great team. Utah State is now 1-4, but Utah State lost to Alabama, right? They lost to, UNLV was a bad loss. I mean, they're not a terrible football team. And BYU played bad and still won. I mean, again, Notre Dame lost to Marshall, y'all. They lost to Marshall, who lost to Bowling Green. And who was the team that beat Marshall the other day, right? Or this past weekend?
Troy. Right?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I mean, that's just bad. That's
actually a better loss than losing to Bowling Green, though. But yeah,
that's true.
Bowling Green's terrible, man.
Yeah, they're not good, y'all. I mean, their 2 wins are over Norfolk State and Notre Dame, right? I mean, so Notre Dame still has a lot to prove, but BYU is not a good run defense. They're not. They've given up 200 yards at least 3 times already this year. They're not, but they are a team that does other things really well. They're a very dangerous offense. They're not a good defense. Notre Dame should move the ball and score on them. Simple as fact. And that's why I picked them to lose to Oregon, because, they beat Baylor. Baylor's offense is not good. At least it wasn't up to that. It wasn't up until the Iowa State game. I thought they looked much better against Iowa State. Maybe they're kind of a little bit of a breakout against Iowa State. Maybe. We'll see. But they're not good. Baylor made BYU's defense look better than it was. South Florida actually moved the ball on them a little bit. And so I thought they'd lose to Oregon. They did. I didn't think it'd be that big of a blowout. And then Utah State moved it on them. But, they're not good there, but they're very good in some other areas. And they are going to be a tough out. And the reason I want to push back on this, Ryan, is because if you don't appreciate how good BYU is, if Notre Dame wins, and if Notre Dame wins convincingly, it diminishes how impressive of a victory that would be. This is a team that went 6-1 last year against Power 5 teams. 6-1. Yep. And they've already got a Power 5 win over a team that won the Sugar Bowl last year. So, that's a good team. And then we're going to end here, Ryan, from Ian Johnson. B. Ryan, agree or disagree? The Pac-12 and Big 12 are the most entertaining to watch. There's no truly dominant team in the conference, and the talent is pretty well spread out. What say you, Ryan? I would agree with half of that.
I don't like watching the Pac-12. USC makes it better.
Page. Yes.
Right. Like, they make it better. It's a little more entertaining, but Chip Kelly can get my attention at times, offensively, at least from a run game perspective. Like, I think he's pretty creative in what he does as a, like, from a formational perspective and just from a scheme perspective. But Oregon, I think, is pretty boring. Washington State's trying to do the air raid thing. I don't think they do it very well. Washington's like kind of entertaining, I guess, with Kalen DeBoer. So I guess they're getting more entertaining as I'm kind of working through some of the teams. But, like, I guess I would take Big 12 as a little more entertaining.
Yeah.
I actually like the guy that was at Western Kentucky last year with Bailey Zappi is now actually the offensive coordinator at Texas Tech now. So I think that they're going to be a lot more entertaining to watch. Texas, as long as they're healthy, Sarkisian, I think, has a lot of good things happening there. And TCU with Sonny Dykes now in, I think has been, Max Duggan looks like a completely different quarterback than he has over the last couple of years. So I'd probably say Big 12 is a little more exciting for me to watch, but I don't know, Brian. I just don't really get much kicks out of the Pac-12 anymore. It's not quite as good as it used to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is not. It's yes, I would say it's a very competitive league, but it's more so competitive because nobody's good. I think the Big 12's problem is there's not a great team in the Big 12, but there's a lot of quality football teams in the Big 12, which is why we see the Big 12 pull off some upset wins every year. I like the Big 12. I think I like it even more the last couple of years because the defense has gotten better. It's still not great, but it's gotten better. And I think it's a good league. Oklahoma State's a quality football team.
Baylor.
TCU, Baylor. Obviously Oklahoma and Texas are still in it. Texas Tech's had some really competitive games against Big 12 teams recently. They're playing better. They're the teams that made the biggest jump on defense in recent years. They're still not great, but they used to be terrible. Kansas is better under Lance Leopold.
I forgot about Kansas, man. Talk about a fun
Kansas
story.
State under Chris Kleeman. There's not a bad team in the Big 12 this year. There's just no great team in the Big 12 this year. I would rather watch that than an SEC with three great teams and a bunch of And I'd rather watch Kansas State, or pick the two worst teams in the Big 12, whoever you think they are. I'd rather watch that than almost any matchup in the Pac-12. So I agree. The Big 12 is, and I've said this for years, the reason the Big 12 gets has never gotten the respects they should, Ryan, is because there's no great team. I like the conference that's got depth. That's more entertaining to me than a conference has a team playing for the title, but nothing. Like the ACC with Clemson, right? The Big 12's been better than the ACC for years. There's just no Clemson in the Big 12. But 2 through 10 and now 2 through 12 are going to be better. And then when you add the two, there is a bad team in the Big 12, West Virginia. They're not good. Yeah. But that's the one.
But they're not as bad as the worst team in the Pac-12, Colorado.
Correct.
Awful.
They would smash Colorado.
Any team would smash. Any Power 5 team. I think they might be the worst Power 5 team out there.
They're really bad. They're really bad. And I think the Big 12 is going to get even better. Yes, they're going to lose Texas and Oklahoma. I'm talking about from a depth standpoint. Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, and then I'm drawing Central Florida. That's going to make that league really good, where the Pac-12 has a much bigger names. I could not care less about the Pac-12. I am liking that Washington's coming back, though. I think Kalen DeBoer is if Kalen DeBoer stays at Washington, and if Oregon can keep doing what they're doing and kind of building, and then USC can get back to being good, and what Chip's doing at UCLA, and the Pac-12 is ascending to me. I like what Justin Wilcox is doing at Cal. And I like what Jed Fish is doing in Arizona. So my stance could change in a couple of years. I do like some of the coaching moves coming out of the Pac-12. Of course, now UCLA and USC are about to leave. But I do, if the Pac-12 stays together, I think it's ascending because of some of the head coaching hires they made in recent years. But that's also why, if I'm the Big 12, I'm trying to get Arizona, trying to get Arizona State. I'm trying to, I'm trying to get some of those teams to kind of come join your league. I would try to go get Colorado, because at least you can get that Denver market, even though Colorado stinks. But I would make a run. I would try to raid the Pac-12 before the Big 10 does. If I'm the Pac-12, I would try to raid the Pac-12 if I'm the Big 12 before the Big 10 does. Is what I would do. So anyway,
and
Ryan,
Colorado should not be a Pac-12 team. They just should not be.
No, they should have always been, just like Nebraska should. I mean, if I would do a trade, hey, we won't get into a bidding war for you for Oregon and Washington if you give us Nebraska back. If you give us Nebraska, and then you bring Nebraska, get Colorado, get Utah, get Arizona State, and all of a sudden now, you've got a chance to kind of go do some things. That's what I would do. Anyway, Ryan, it was great doing a show with you again, man. It's been a pleasure. I want to thank you for helping out this week. I want to thank everybody who stepped up this week. We did have a couple super chat. Oh, no, we did get to those super chats. I don't think we had any pop up here at the end, Ryan, that I missed. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anybody's super chats. I want to thank everybody for your prayers this week. I want to thank everybody for your support. We just want to thank everybody for here we go. This is a good one here. From Tyler Evans, Brian and Ryan, I'm taking my father to UNLV game. He has not made it there since 1988 against Miami. Well, hey, maybe that's a good sign, right? That kind of was the game that was the springboard for Notre Dame becoming a dominant program. And so your dad could be the, Tyler, your dad could be the good luck charm for Notre Dame. So, Ryan, I think that is it for super chats from everybody. Thank you all so much. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., me and Sean Davis, IB Countdown to Kickoff. Be there. Join us. Join the message board at irishbreakdown.com. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Hug your wife and kids. Hug your family. Don't take for granted that you will get tomorrow, because we don't always have it. So I want to thank all of you all so much. We will talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.